has now been 4 hours and 14 minutes, almost 4 hours and 15 minutes since the polls started closing across America. And we have been calling and projecting winners in races across the country. And at this hour, not a single state that was carried by the Democrats in 2000 has been carried by the Republicans, and vice versa. We were able to make an interesting call, however, in Texas, a congressional district down there, where two incumbents ended up pitted against one another. And one of the people who kept an eye on that whole situation down there was Fred Barnes, who is with me tonight. Fred, what can you tell us?
Well, I can tell you that it was Tom DeLay, the House Majority Leader and Republican, who was the guy who nailed Martin Frost. And Frost, a longtime Democratic congressman down there, you pointed out earlier how important he'd been. Republicans there were always going to redistrict the state to benefit Republicans, and they did. But the question was whether or not they would go after Martin Frost, whether they'd settle for winning maybe 4 or 5 seats, or whether they'd go for the big casino and try to win 6 or 7, including knocking off Martin Frost. The man who made the decision to get Frost was Tom DeLay. So they drew a district for him that was almost impossible for any Democrat to win. I think Martin Frost did about as well as anybody conceivably could, but he couldn't overcome geography. Also out in West Texas, Charlie Stenholm, the veteran Democratic conservative congressman who's, I think, the ranking Democrat on the House Agriculture Committee, is running way behind, and it looks like he'll be defeated. It may be the only targeted Democrat who will survive, who's a little bit ahead now, is Chet Edwards, who's actually the Democratic congressman from Crawford, Texas, or he represents Crawford, the president's ranch is.
Let's talk a little bit about that situation, because that is part, of course, of the whole picture of the House, and why it is now going to be almost impossible for denied possible for the Democrats to get control of the place. But that whole redistricting is up in the air, not for this election, but for the next one, because a court has set the whole plan aside, at least for re-examination, correct?
Well, the question was whether the legislature, after the legislature didn't act and federal judges redrew the state, other districts, whether after that the legislature could come back in and do its own reapportionment. And they did, with Republicans in control, did it to their advantage. And now that's not up in the air in this election, but it will be reviewed by the lower court. And I would add about Martin Frost, though, that he's not entirely an innocent victim here, because he was the one in charge after the 1990 census of reapportioning the state. One of his aides drew the map, which was a gerrymander in favor of Democrats.
Which, 10 years later, the tables got turned, right?
Exactly.
No angels in this drama, right?
Well, one trend here, though, is that the numbers of moderates in the Congress continues to diminish. I mean, Chet Edwards will be about the only one left in Texas. If you get Martin Frost was a pro-defense Democrat. Charlie Stenholm was a strong conservative Democrat with a budget hawk and all of that. If the two of them are gone, the one survivor here is Rob Simmons in Connecticut. The Democrats tried to gerrymander him out of his seat. It looks like he's surviving.
All right. Okay, obviously we're watching, in addition, of course, to the House, where we've called that race and kept an eye on some others. There doesn't seem to be much chance of any change of balance of power there. But there does continue to be, of course, this issue of the balance of power in the Senate. And as you can see, our colleague Brian Wilson is standing by. He's got pen in hand, paper in front of him. He obviously knows some stuff. Brian, bring us up to date.
Yeah, I've been watching 9 races very closely, because many people, most of the experts, believe it really came down to 9 races in the United States Senate. Basically, most pundits agreed that when the night started, the Republicans needed to pick up 4, and so far they have already picked up 5. Here, however, is the official balance of power graphic that we have right now. It would be 53, 1, and 46 if everything goes as we expect it will, and if all those safe seats that we projected earlier turn out to go the way we project. We've had wins from the Republicans with Coburn, DeMint, Bunning in Kentucky, Burr in North Carolina, and the most recent one, of course, that you mentioned a few moments ago is Arlen Specter in Pennsylvania, who started out slow, but whose numbers grew throughout the night as the rural vote came in the state of Pennsylvania. It's often been said said there are 2 big population centers in Pennsylvania, but the large, vast majority of the land in between is rural Republican, and it took a while for those numbers to come in. So right now, 53 votes for Republicans in the Senate. The balance of power, it looks increasingly almost impossible now for the Democrats to have any claim on control of the Senate.
What would they have to do? I mean, they'd have to hold a Daschle seat, right? Your 53-46 math doesn't include that's with Daschle still in office, correct?
Still in office, right. And we're not calling those races as yet, but they would basically have to be, some of the safe seats that we projected very early would have to go the other way, and that doesn't look likely.
All right, Brian, very interesting. Thanks very much for the update. We're going to take a quick break here, but before we do, we can project a winner in Arizona for president. That's President Bush, as expected. Still, no blue state has gone red, no red state has gone blue. That's the state of the national election picture at 11:20. We're taking a break. Be right back. We got a projection. This is still no change, but in Montana, a state in the Mountain West thought safe for the president. He's won. As the night wears on, even though we haven't called any of these swing states for anybody yet, we're beginning to get a picture that becomes, there's a little clarity anyway. Let's talk a little bit about Florida. Florida has become a linchpin for the president. And what do we, Bill, you've been following this all night long, keeping track of the raw vote. What is your sense of it now?
Well, if there's nothing funny about the raw tabulation, it looks like Bush will win. He's ahead by about 300,000 votes with about 6% outstanding, which would be about 500,000 votes, about 500,000 votes outstanding, which he's not going to lose, 4-1. I mean, so 400,000 to 100,000. So it looks to me.
In other words, in order for Kerry to make that up and provide a margin of victory, he'd have to win 4 out of 5 of the remaining untabulated
It looks
votes.
like that. And even if the untabulated votes are from, Miami or West Palm Beach or something, the margin's not going to be that big. So it looks to me as if Bush is going to win Florida. Our decision desk obviously isn't going to call it until they have a much higher level of certainty. So I think Florida is going to come back for the president, and that is going to make, well, here, let's look at these numbers. So Bush is up by almost 300,000.
Yeah, he's got a 5%
with 5%
margin.
of the precincts out. So you can do the math. 5% of the precincts out is about 350,000 votes out. So unless there's something funny, unless there's a huge number of absentee ballots that are being contested, it would have to be huge. It looks to me like Bush wins. Florida, incidentally, if you look at I've been looking at the raw numbers, it looks like Florida turnout's going to be about 15% higher than 2000. It looks to me like national turnout's going to be up at least 10%. Looks like there'll be 120 million voters this year, I think.
It was thought that 120 million voters was curtains for the president.
Yeah, but it looks like he's in the, it's a big increase in turnout on both sides. It looks like both parties turned out.
Is that the way it looks to you, Mort, too?
Absolutely. It looks like the Republicans had a unified turnout the vote effort under the Bush campaign. The Democrats was much more diffuse among so-called 527 groups, Americans Coming Together, the Democratic National Committee, the Kerry campaign, but they congealed. So it looks like, both sides are way up. And what that means in terms of outcome, I mean, it was thought that big-time turnout would benefit Kerry, and it may yet. But the Bush people certainly turned it on. They knew what they were doing.
Well, don't forget that there are some challenges coming in Florida in terms of votes that were people didn't get their absentee ballots and the like. So there's going to be some litigation in Florida as well, some challenges on that basis. But I think the increased turnout is really a boost for both sides at this point. And there's a story in that previously it was the Democrats who turned out their voters in the last 72 hours. Clearly, the Republicans have had some success there. But that takes us to what I think is really now the linchpin of the whole election, which is the state of Ohio. And it takes us into specifically the Columbus, Ohio area. We heard earlier from Michael Barone talking about Franklin County. He said right now it's about 50-48 Kerry, but clearly not all the votes are in. But again, turnout way up. And if you look at Franklin County, last time around, Gore won there by about 4,000 votes in 2000, while Bush was winning the state. Now, if you have Kerry winning strong there, that could be the difference. It literally comes down to that area, it comes down to that suburban county, and comes down to all the predictions that were made months ago when Kerry first won the nomination, that it would be all about Ohio and all about the suburban areas and all about women, especially suburban women, the security moms, whatever you want to call them, soccer moms, outside of Columbus. That's where the fight is as we approach 11:30 at night.
You know, I agree with you, Juan.
Just one footnote to that. There are only, if I got this right, 5 Bush states from 2000 that are really at risk still, that we either haven't called or that are pretty automatic. Florida, but let's leave that aside for a minute. Ohio, New Hampshire, Arkansas, have we called that?
No, it's been called.
No, we called Arkansas.
Okay. Colorado and Nevada.
Right.
Remember, New Hampshire doesn't do it by himself. And actually, New Hampshire and Nevada doesn't even do it. That's 9 votes. That would go to 269, 269.
It's all about Ohio.
Bush wins. So I think Colorado's going to be okay for Bush. So it's all about Ohio. Now, if Bush lost Ohio, he conceivably could make it up, as we've been discussing with the Iowa, Wisconsin, New Mexico. But the truth is, right now, I believe if Bush wins Ohio, he wins the presidency.
You know, I think but it shows that the map has shifted. Where Bush has a lot of opportunities to make up states, to get some blue states, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, New Mexico, Hawaii, states that he at least has a shot in, swing states. But Kerry has to win Ohio. He can't win the presidency without winning Ohio. And I agree with what others have said. It may boil down to the Columbus area, Franklin County. But Ohio is not as critical for Bush as it is for Kerry, and you know what? What many people thought before the election.
It's pretty critical. He's not going to get Minnesota.
All right, pretty critical it is. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll check in on some ballot referenda, and we'll be keeping a close eye on Ohio. Let's look at the Ohio board now. This has become the focus of attention for the entire political world at this moment. Raw vote out there, President up slightly, 61% in, President up by what, 132,000 votes. In a state the size of Ohio, 132,000 votes can be overcome with another, with only, of course, when you say 61% of precincts in, that's done by number of precincts, not by population. So we don't know what proportion of the raw vote is still to be found out there, and how much opportunity there may be for Senator Kerry to make up that difference. But we are nowhere near prepared to call that race. We are prepared, however, to talk about why and what signs there may be of which way this might end up going with Michael Barone, who is down with our decision desk. Michael, can you provide us some further insight on Ohio? That looks, to the naked eye, like a reasonable lead in Ohio for President Bush. What are your thoughts?
Well, Britt, I'm just looking at some of the tabulated vote figures here in the different counties, and I'm seeing a number of different things. I'm concentrating this time on the large counties, Cuyahoga County, which includes Cleveland, and majority of it's suburban. But Democrats got 166,000 vote majority for Al Gore here. About half the precincts have counted there. We're looking at a plurality for John Kerry of about 94,000 votes. That's well short of the 166. The problem here is I don't know which precincts haven't reported from Cuyahoga County. If the Cleveland precincts are all in, that's very good news for George W. Bush. But if this is mainly suburban precincts, there could be more big number of votes coming in for John Kerry here. On the other hand, the second largest county, Franklin, 3/4 of that is in. George W. Bush is behind 47 to 52. That's a little worse than his showing in 2000, not a good sign. There's also a big reservoir of votes that haven't been reported in Hamilton County, Britt. And one of the problems in Hamilton County, as I understand it, is that the county prosecutor got involved in some kind of shenanigans and for whatever reasons withdrew his candidacy, and both parties are backing write-in candidates for prosecutors, so they're taking a long time. Hamilton County's only reported 219 out of 1,018 precincts. Currently, it shows Kerry carrying at 50 to 49. That is, however, basically a Republican county. The suburbs are very heavily Republican. That means there's probably a reservoir of Republican votes out there that hasn't been counted yet. Clermont County, too, just east of of Cincinnati. You got 52 out of 191 precincts there. That's 70% for George W. Bush. That's approximately the kind of margin that you would expect for a Republican candidate out of Claremont County. Rob Portman, the congressman who takes some of the part in debate prep for the president, Mr. Cheney, is from that county. It's a fast-growing county. So there are reservoirs of votes possibly for both candidates. Now, where there aren't big reservoirs of votes, Mahoning County, which is a heavily Democratic county around Youngstown, and Trumbull County. These counties are producing over 60% for John Kerry. That's the good news for him. The bad news is there's only 18 precincts left in Mahoning County. There's somewhat more left in Trumbull, so that's not a big reservoir of votes for him. Stark County, only a third of the votes in. That's a very closely divided county. So the answer is it's possible that John Kerry could cut into George W. Bush's lead. It's possible that he could overcome it. But there are also large reservoirs of likely Republican votes that haven't been counted yet here. So we don't know what the turnout is in the big cities. We don't know where those Cuyahoga County votes that are sitting there on the board and the Franklin County votes come from. So we got to leave you with some element of uncertainty about the result in Ohio.
I must tell you, Michael, as I listen to that at 11:30 at night, or just past 11:30 at night, it doesn't sound like we're anywhere near being able to make any calculations or any projections about Ohio, does it?
Well, if if as many precincts report within the next hour as have reported approximately in the last hour, if I've been keeping track of my time and my precincts carefully, we should be narrowing down the number of unlikely reservoirs of votes for either side down to a sense where we can probably estimate whether or not a Bush margin or a Kerry margin can be sustained in Ohio.
Very informative, Michael. Thank you very much. All right. So let's check in with Greta. I'm sorry. Forgive me. What we want to do first is check in with Carl Cameron to tell us what the Kerry campaign is now saying, as the very bright picture painted for them by the exit polling this afternoon appears in this hour of the evening to be at least not as bright. Carl?
Yeah, that's about right, Britt. The Kerry campaign senior aides were very laid back, optimistic, upbeat earlier today, and now they're getting very busy. Not quite frantic, but clearly concerned. And there has been something of a change not only in their body language, but also in their description of things. Florida, they now say, is admittedly quite close, but they look across the country and they think that most of the other battleground states are going quite well for them. And in Ohio, to sort of complement and extrapolate from some of the stuff that Michael Barone was talking about, the Kerry campaign points to Stark County, a Republican county, and they say that a couple of hours ago they were actually leading, even though there was a very, very small percentage of the vote in from there. Franklin County, a predominantly Democratic county in Ohio, where Al Gore won last time around by about 4,000 votes, the Kerry campaign now says that they're up about 25,000 votes, a significant increase in the Gore margin of 4 years ago, and they point to that as a very positive sign. Nonetheless, you were talking about when we might be able to predict this. In talking to two top operatives for the Kerry campaign, one for the Kerry campaign, I should say, in Ohio, and the other one for Americans Coming Together, this very large 527 special interest group run out of Washington by Harold Ickes and company that has really been of profound important effect for Democrats on the ground in Ohio. Both of them say they don't expect any of the networks to come close to making a call until at least 1:30 this morning. So those folks for the Democrats who are watching the ground game, they don't think it's going to be determinable for at least another hour and a half too.
All right, Carl, will you please tell them that that's past my bedtime and that they'll need to, get on with it?
I'm sure that'll be a big consideration for them.
Yeah, I'm sure. All right, Carl, thanks very much. Stay warm. We'll be back to you soon. In the meantime, let's check in with Carl's counterpart on the Bush campaign, our senior White House correspondent, Jim Angle. Jim, what do they say about Ohio down there?
Britt, I don't have any more encouraging news for you on that bedtime hour. They do believe it will be an hour and a half before we get word on some of these places, but they do think that they are doing better in Ohio, obviously, than the Democrats think they are. I've had various numbers from people over the last hour or so, up 170,000 in Ohio, up 80,000 in Ohio. They think they're doing quite well and doing well even in areas where they weren't expected to do that well. They also have all but said they've got Florida, that with 92% or more of the vote being counted, they do not believe it is possible for the Democrats to now pull out a win in Florida. There are too few precincts left to count, too much of a lead for the president. They think they have Florida in their column now, so things are looking up a bit for them here. They're still watching, of course, Ohio and looking for some of the other Midwestern states, but even there, it still appears to be a dogfight, but that will take another hour or hour and a half, so bedtime's not looking good.
Right about that, but we continue to have hope, and who knows? Vote tabulations can come pouring in at a great rate, and we will watch for them. Jim, let us know if you have anything further from them, particularly something that strikes you as credible. Always helpful. Let's take a break. We'll be back shortly. The state of Ohio, way too close to call at this hour, but for some further insight on how the Democrats may now be regarding that state, let's check in with Susan Estrich. No one has better sources among them than she does. Susan, what do you have for us?
Well, I've been talking to some of my Democratic friends about Ohio, and let me see if I can say this carefully, Brit. A top Kerry aide just said to me, Ohio is everything. And I look at those 130,000, that 130,000 gap, and the line I'm getting, or the report I'm getting, is focused on Cuyahoga County. Now, Cuyahoga County is Cleveland, and I want to, if I misknow it all, let me predict that when you get full reports from Cuyahoga County, I'm going to predict that that gap is going to go from 130,000 right down to 30,000. And then what's going to happen is you're going to see a dramatically different picture. Then you got to look at the rest of urban Ohio, the rest of Ohio Democrats, and the view among Democrats who I'm talking to, and this includes both senior Kerry aides and also some old friends from Ohio who've been in Cuyahoga County for a long time and have done Democratic politics, is that when you take in the reports from Cuyahoga County that have not come in at all, plus the urban Democrats who have not been counted at all, the 130,000 vote margin is going to disappear within the next few hours, and Ohio is going to be looking very good for John Kerry, which will leave us later in the night, putting aside Florida for a moment, where I'm getting a lot of word from lawyers that there are a lot of questions, as you've heard, about ballots. I also heard as recently as 25 minutes ago that there were Democrats still in line trying to vote in South Florida, in Broward and Dade County, that we're going to be looking, Britt, at Wisconsin, at Iowa, and New Mexico later on in the evening.
Susan, it sounds as if, from what you're describing, that so much of what is still out in Ohio is urban and likely Democratic, and so little of what is left to come in is rural or suburban and Republican, correct?
Well, all I know, and as you know, I'm from Massachusetts, not Ohio. All I know is that the Kerry people who have looked very carefully at Ohio and talked to their people in Ohio believe that there are more than enough urban Democratic uncounted votes from Ohio to close the gap, go above the 130,000 number you just saw on that screen, and win Ohio for Kerry.
What is your sense? What is your feel for this?
I know exactly, I mean, I can't use names, but I know exactly who these people are. And I know who's promised who to what. And based on that, I'm willing to say that I believe that Ohio is going to end up in the Kerry column, and that we're going to be looking, you and me, at Wisconsin, Iowa, and New Mexico.
Susan Estrich, always interesting, always knowledgeable, always informed. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay. What about that? That's interesting. This is not the first time in a national election we have been in a state where it was close and tight, and it was slow to tabulate, slow to come in results from heavy urban areas that told the story, and they were often the reason why you couldn't make an early call based upon what seemed to be a comfortable lead for one candidate or another.
Well, you look at Cuyahoga County that Susan Estridge was just talking about in Cleveland. In 2000, we had numbers indicated Gore winning there 166,000. Now this time we have Kerry up by 94, and everybody was talking early on that in Cuyahoga County you really had to close the gap. That was where you could anticipate a large Democratic machine producing the votes necessary to give the state to Senator Kerry. But this time, you see, it's smaller. So what Susan's saying is there's still votes there that haven't been counted.
Right.
And I don't. The other part of this is Franklin County around Columbus that we've been talking about. Franklin County is famous among people who are in the marketing business. It's literally, does it play in Peoria in America today in 2004? The question is, does it play in Franklin County? People take products there to try them out. And I guess we're taking a presidential candidate there. But the thing is that President Bush seems to be doing worse there. And I'm puzzled by that. Maybe it's the impact of Bruce Springsteen and all the rock and roll and the fact that the state university is there. But it's a surprise to me. And that could be a big ticket win for Kerry.
Of course, how much of that is in? Do we know?
We don't know exactly. See, three-quarters is in right now, according to what we heard from Mike Barone. So, but again, that would be a big turning point in the calculus of Ohio.
See, the point that Susan made, the reason she said when Ohio goes, if it goes for Kerry, we're looking at Wisconsin, Iowa, and New Mexico, is that by itself, Ohio doesn't quite do it, correct?
Here's a not unlikely scenario. Ohio could go very narrowly Democratic, though it strikes me as really a 50-50 proposition right now. New Hampshire could go for Kerry. It looks like he's a tiny bit ahead. Again, a very close proposition.
So that's 24 votes, right?
I don't.
That's 24 electoral votes.
I'm sorry, that's 24 additional electoral votes for Kerry. That takes him up to 284. Let's give Bush
284 or
no.
284, including everything else.
Including everything else. But let's take away now New Mexico with its 5. That takes him, which I think Bush has a very good chance to win. He's ahead now. That takes him to 279. We've seen no data from Wisconsin that I can see on our screen. I haven't heard any. But if Bush were to then win Wisconsin, which was extremely close last time, you would be at 269, 269. It is not an impossible. It is not an impossible outcome. And somehow it would be, I suppose, poetic justice if we end up with the 269, 269
269 electoral.
But then there's one thing we don't know. Wasn't the Maine, when we projected Maine,
yeah,
did we withhold the question of whether Bush could win the second congressional district?
There are 4 electoral votes in Maine.
Maine distributes them by 2 for the winner and then 1 for the winner of each congressional district.
Right.
And we don't know, I think, who's won the second congressional district.
Which means that we've got this one little electoral vote floating around out there in the wind somewhere that we got to figure out how to allocate. Maybe Michael Barone can help us with that as we and that could decide the election. Oh boy.
Maybe Bush will win Ohio and save us from this.
Not tonight.
Well, the other thing about Ohio is that while the litigation bullet may be dodged in Florida, if it's if it is a very narrow Bush or Kerry victory, I think we're going to see people in the courts tomorrow.
Tonight. Well, everybody.
Tonight even.
Everybody was predicting that Ohio would be the next Florida. Well, it is. And if 2000 the 2000 model.
Well, don't rule out from what you heard what Susan said about lawyers, guns, and money or whatever. That don't rule out Florida being the next Florida too. So.
Brett, remember the hanging chads from Florida?
Yeah.
In those punch cards, I think there are 5 million punch card voters in Ohio. 5 million potential hanging chads. Think about it.
There are only 6 million voters in Ohio.
Oh, maybe I got the wrong number, but there are a lot of them anyway.
Okay. Well, while we await the returns from Cuyahoga County and Franklin County, Ohio, and assorted other locales, let's take a break. hours nearly after polls started closing across the country, everything has come down to what everybody actually thought it would. Ohio. While we await more information from and on Ohio, let's check in with Martha McCallum for information on some of the other races. Martha?
Hi there, Britt. Well, some of the surprises have actually come up in the Senate races. Very strong night for GOP Senate candidates. Let's take a look. We're going to start, though, with South Dakota, where we'll get a look at whether Tom Daschle has a chance of holding on to his minority leader position in the Senate. 49 to 51. John Thune looks to be ahead right now. 61% of the precincts reporting in South Dakota, but we know that there's already been one lawsuit filed last night on behalf of the Daschle folks with regard to the Native American vote. This is one that we may not get a final decision on for some time and may indeed be contested. John Thune lost his last Senate race to the junior senator in South Dakota by 524 votes. So he is clearly looking for a win here, and we'll see what he's able to pull off tonight in terms of South Dakota. Let's take a look at some of these other Senate races. I think we have Louisiana coming up next. Do we have a look at Louisiana? Louisiana, let me just get you up to speed on what's going on there. David Vitter is putting in a very strong showing. He needs to be better than 50%. You can see he's at 52% right now. This is a big surprise. There has not been a Republican senator from the state of Louisiana. The two gentlemen there, Chris John and John Kennedy, are the Democratic runners in this race. But if Vitter gets over 52%, there will be no runoff on December 4th in the state of Louisiana, and he will be the first Republican, and that would be a big pickup for the Republicans. This is a look at the Florida Senate race. We know the presidential race too close to call at this point in Florida. This one also too close to call. President Bush has put a lot of support behind Mel Martinez, his former housing secretary, and this race is still very tight. 97% of the precincts in is still too close to call. Ken Salazar, interesting. He is one of several Democratic candidates who chose really not to campaign with Senator Kerry when he came calling in their state. He did make one late appearance with John Kerry, but it's a very moderate state, and in many of these states, the Senate candidates felt that it might not serve them well to be seen campaigning around the state with John Kerry. So we'll see how that ends up working out for Ken Salazar, who's at 51%. Peter Core's at 47% right now. Alaska race, one that the Republicans want very much to hold on to. Lisa Murkowski is the incumbent there. Her father held that seat. He turned it over to her when he became the governor of Alaska, and she's up against Tony Knowles, who's the former Democratic governor of Alaska, and that race still too close to call, but we're keeping a close eye on that and also a very close eye on South Dakota, Britt, and we'll send it back to you.
Okay, that South Dakota race is obviously the hot ticket among the Senate contests, although from what we've been able to see so far, it appears the odds of the Republicans losing the Senate are almost gone. I mean, that prospect is shot. The question seems to be whether they'll gain 1 or 2 or 3 seats, right? I mean, is that
yeah, I mean, look, it's a big fact that the Republicans look pretty certain now to hold both houses of the U.S. Congress. Yet another. They won it both in '94, except for that 1.5 years after Jim Jeffords switched, and the Democrats controlled it for the latter half of 2001 and 2002. Republicans have held both houses for now, what, 10 years?
Yeah, we can illustrate that, I think, with a graphic on the balance of power in the Congress. Let's take a look. Well, there's the Senate. Now, this is tonight. This is with some switches having occurred. It was 51 to 48 going in, and there's net switches 2 for the Republicans, 53-46. That number 53 is not going to get any smaller. So
it could get. Well, I mean, if Colorado and Alaska,
that's right. Colorado and New Mexico
could be 52. But I think
Alaska, Colorado, Alaska could knock it back to 51, right. Which could put us back up to where we were.
And then Louisiana comes in, where Vitter looks like he's going to get over 50% and be elected senator from there. So,
and then South Dakota's a question.
Yeah,
so it looks like it's 52 or 53.
52, 53.
So that mean a pickup of 2?
1 or 2.
But I got to tell you, it'd be psychologically, I think, very damaging for the Democrats to see Daschle go down. I think they really had hopes, and of course, don't forget, I think if Daschle, I don't know what's the total number of votes that are in, but I think Daschle's relying heavily on those Indian votes that we were talking about in New Mexico. He's also relying on them in South Dakota.
Okay, let's check in with Chris Wallace, who has a guest. Chris?
Thanks, Britt. We want to talk to one of the closest advisors, one of the longtime confidants of President Bush, and that is Karen Hughes, who was out of politics, out of Washington, and sort of like the Godfather in Part 3, got pulled back in. Hey, Karen, how you doing?
Doing great, Chris. How are you?
Well, let's talk about a couple of specific states. First of all, Florida. Some networks are calling it already for the president. Fox News has not yet called it. What is the governor of the state telling his brother about Florida?
He's feeling very, very confident about it. We've got a report from Karl Rove and periodically throughout the night from Governor Jeb Bush, who called the president and told him that as he checked in counties across the state, he found we were performing better than expected in Democratic counties, that we were winning some swing counties, particularly in the Tampa area, that we had lost in 2000, and that we've had a very good, very strong turnout in our Republican counties. So he was very optimistic and told his brother that he expected that we would soon be able to call Florida. And of course, since that time, a couple of networks have called it. As someone who went through those 36 days of recount, I have to tell you, it puts a great smile on my face to be able to, I think, put Florida in the bank and say that it's a win for the president this time.
All right, let's move on to Ohio, which a lot of people are thinking is the state that this election is going to come down to. The Kerry people say they're very confident about Ohio. What are you hearing?
Well, Karl Rove again has been on the phone with our county chairman throughout the state, and they're feeling very good. It is close, and it may be closer than Florida. It's close, but we believe that, again, we are outperforming in every county that we've contacted over what we expected to do. We are winning swing counties, particularly in the Columbus area. We're doing better than expected in some Democratic areas, and obviously we've had a huge turnout there as we have in other places, and so we've had a good, strong turnout among our Republican voters. So we're feeling very confident about it. I think for Senator Kerry's campaign, it all comes down to Ohio. We have several paths to victory. We expect that we will carry Ohio, but there are also several other states and combinations of states that we could carry and re-elect President Bush.
Let me ask you about that. If you were to lose Ohio, tell me the single best chance that Karl Rove is saying that you have to pick off a blue state tonight.
Well, I don't know if he's saying a single best chance. He said there's a number of them. There are a number of states that Vice President Gore won in 2000 where we are either ahead or in a virtual tie right now. Wisconsin, Iowa, New Mexico are among them. I have a great feeling about Wisconsin. I spent a lot of time there with President Bush. We traveled through there on bus tours. And as we drove through the state, I remember seeing a lot of Wisconsin just people coming out and sitting in their lawn chairs on their front yards, holding up homemade signs saying, "We support you, Mr. President," and "Stand for marriage," and "Stand for family." And it's a state that I think where the president's message resonated, and we're feeling very good about Wisconsin.
Karen, give us a sense, take us briefly behind the scenes. Obviously, some of these early exit polls, which have now been largely discredited, indicated that it might be a good night for Senator Kerry. Give us a sense, as the president was hearing about these exit polls, how down he got, if perhaps he did, and how his mood has changed as the night has gone on.
Well, he's feeling great right now. I talked to him right before I came over to this party. I've been over at the White House with the senior staff, and he's up with his family and close friends watching returns. He told me he was very optimistic and feeling good. We got those first exit poll numbers right as Air Force One was landing in Washington. We were just coming into Andrews Air Force Base, and he looked at me and shrugged, and I remember him saying, he said, "I'm surprised." He said, "But it is what it is." And he was very stoic about it. I don't think he thought that it was right. And as Karl Rove and Dan Bartlett and others on our staff began talking about the numbers, we began realizing there were some very odd things. For example, some of the East Coast states, Virginia and North Carolina, that we felt very comfortable that the president would carry, and in fact he has carried very handily. The numbers showed at that time Senator Kerry winning, so we knew there were some problems from the get-go. And of course then we just had a long time to wait, and the president spent the time with his family. I think enjoyed some hours of relaxation, as much as you can relax when you know something so important is on the line. But he's feeling very optimistic tonight.
Now, Karen, I know that this is a president who likes to go to bed early, but on the other hand, his presidency lies in the balance. Is he planning to stay up until he finds out what happens, or at some point is he going to turn in?
Well, obviously we're all hoping that we'll know tonight and that he will be reelected tonight. If we get some more numbers in from Ohio, that's certainly a possibility. We're thinking, when I left the White House probably 30 minutes ago, they were thinking that we might know something in another hour or two. So we'll see. I mean, obviously he's up. I talked to him right before I came over here. He's following it very closely, talking with people in the states themselves, calling people to congratulate people as they win. is up and watching this all very, very closely, as I'm sure people across America are. It's been an exciting election, another exciting election, and I think it's really great, Chris, how many people turned out to vote. It's exciting for our democracy.
Karen Hughes, thank you so much. At the stroke of midnight, we're going to say good night to you, although we'll probably come back later when we have final returns. And let's move now to the one star, at this point, the one bright star in the Democratic constellation tonight, and that is Senator-elect Barack Obama of Illinois. Senator-elect, congratulations.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's great to talk to you again.
Well, I want to mention that because we talked first and visited during the Democratic convention, and at that time you said, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Well, I think it's time now to get ahead of ourselves. What does it feel like to win 73% of the vote?
Well, you know, obviously, we're extraordinarily gratified to the people of Illinois, and I feel greatly honored. But right now, I'm also monitoring what's happening nationally because, you know, politics is not an individual sport, it's a team sport. And so, as happy as I am about what I hope to be able to accomplish for the people of Illinois, I'm also following the national races with great interest.
Let's talk about the national scene and specifically your new home for the next 6 years, the U.S. Senate. It is looking tonight, not definite, but it is looking as if the Republicans are going to maintain control. If that happens, what do you see as your role and the role of the Democratic Party for the next 4 years, 6 years?
Well, you know, I'm a big believer in the loyal opposition, that we disagree on issues, but we don't be disagreeable. And the kinds of patterns of deep partisan bickering that I think have become the custom in Washington are a mistake. If the Democrats are controlling the Senate, my advice to them will be we still need 60 votes, and so we have to listen to the other side. I hope the Republicans are getting that same advice, and I would give that same advice to whoever gets elected president. This is a closely divided country, and we have to function in ways that reflect that.
Senator-elect Obama, again, congratulations, and we'll see you in Washington soon.
Thank you so much, Chris. I appreciate it.
Back to Brit.
Okay, Chris, thanks very much. It's just after the midnight hour. Let's look down the list of presidential races that we have not been able to cover call state by state. The president's still clinging to a lead a slight lead in Ohio, too close to call. Other networks have called this. We're relatively sure that the president is going to win this. We're just out of an abundance of caution, we're holding back on this, but this is all but in the president's column. New Hampshire, too close to call. Similarly, Michigan, too close to call. Minnesota, the same. Wisconsin, same thing. Now, Colorado, the president looks well ahead there. Probably will win that, but we're not calling it yet. We are being very careful, as we are indeed in New Mexico, where the lead is smaller for the president, about 12,000 votes, just under 12,000 votes. And in Iowa, we see Senator Kerry with a lead. It's, about 225, 215 votes, something like that. That is way too close to call at this 21,200, I should say. Nevada, this is another one which we expect the president might win, but look, Kerry's up with only 6% in. So
that 6%'s wrong because there's too many votes.
Too many votes for that. Okay, well, we'll try to figure that out in a little while. In California, early going, no expectation that the president could pull an upset there. Senator Kerry will probably win that state. And Washington for president, that check mark, pay no attention to that. That state has gone, and we believe that it is gone for Senator Kerry. Oregon, Kerry well up, not yet to be called, although it's getting a little late. And Hawaii, we got very little out of Hawaii yet, so we're not making a call there either. So that's the rundown. Idaho, we've called that for the president, and no surprise there. So at this hour still, 4 minutes past midnight, 5 hours and 4 minutes after polls started closing, not a single state has changed hands. Not a red state has gone blue, nor a blue state red. And the one we're all most intensely focused on is Ohio. But we're also wondering about Wisconsin. There's been very little about Wisconsin. Let's check in with Michael Barone and find out why. Michael, what do we know at this hour about Wisconsin?
Well, the tabulated vote that we've got on Wisconsin right now, Britt, is 50% for John Kerry, 49% for George W. Bush. That's about as close as it comes. 13,000 votes separate. The We haven't got any counties in here that I've seen that we've got full precinct returns, so it's hard to make back-to-back comparisons with what we saw in 2000 when George W. Bush narrowly lost this state 47.6 to 47.8% for Al Gore. Right now, Democrats' two big counties in this state are Milwaukee County. They're leading by about 83,000 votes. They won that county by 88,000 in 2000. I don't know whether the remaining counties, remaining precincts in Milwaukee County, of which there are about 170, are in the suburban areas in which you'd expect a small majority for John Kerry, or perhaps even for some for George Bush, or in the city of Milwaukee, in which case you'd expect a big margin for a bigger margin, but I suspect from the numbers on the board that probably the central city figures are up there. Dane County is the other big county. John Kerry had a monster rally there with Bruce Springsteen in the last days of the campaign. That's Madison, the university county. You know, it's one of those hip university towns that's very left wing. John Kerry's got a 60,000 vote margin. 4 years ago, Al Gore won with 66,000. There's still about 70 precincts left there, so that he could expand the margin. On the other hand, there's room for Republicans to expand their margin. Waukesha County, directly west of Milwaukee, relatively affluent suburban area. That has a 59,000 vote margin for George W. Bush right now, and there are still some 60 precincts. It's running 68% for Bush. Ozaukee County, just north of Milwaukee on Lake Michigan, that's got a 8,000 vote margin for George W. Bush. It was 16,000 last time. Half the precincts are still out. And Washington County, northwest of Milwaukee, that's a suburban and rural area. There's a 12,000 vote margin right there now for George W. Bush. It was 23,000 last time, and more than half of another 26 precincts are open there in Washington County. In addition, we've got an awful lot of rural counties that just have a few returns, and you can't draw many conclusions, but I will look at this. One of the areas that George W. Bush's advisor, Karl Rove, felt that he underperformed in 2000 was western Wisconsin, a beautiful hilly country along the Mississippi River, where the president's 2000 campaign plane wasn't able to get in. They've lengthened the Dubuque runway. Air Force One got him in there, and George W. Bush was on a buscade within the last 10 days. And current figures, fragmentary figures, not full precincts, show him ahead in La Crosse County, where he made a stop in Onalaska, and in Grant County, where he made a stop in Cuba City. So we'll see if the rest of those numbers bear out Bush's recovery in western Wisconsin.
Okay, Michael, interesting. I just want to ask you about something that Susan Estrich was saying earlier about Cuyahoga County. Her sources among Democrats are suggesting that Cuyahoga County holds out enormous progress, enormous promise for the expansion of the Kerry vote there in Ohio. And based upon what's already in and what you've seen, does that bear that out?
That's possibly true. I simply don't know, Britt. I mean, it depends on how much of that vote is already from Cleveland and close-in suburbs like East Cleveland, where you have a high African-American population and you have an overwhelming Democratic margin, or whether or not you're getting out to some of the farther suburbs or on the west side in places like Westlake, where Bush stopped before. I don't have that information, so I can't give you a definitive view on that.
Anything else you can give us on Ohio as we move along here? Obviously, would be. I mean, everybody says this is the ball, really the ball game here.
Well, Cuyahoga County 4 years ago, the percentage for Al Gore was 62.5%. It's showing 62.98% for John Kerry right now. That's almost spot on from before. 36.51 for Bush, and the incomplete returns 4 years ago, he got 35%, so he's slightly up. Those returns sound like they're the average. They may be the average for the whole county, in which case the fact that you've got 450 approximately precincts left out there, or about 1/3 of the precincts, suggests that that 120,000 lead could go up perhaps to 180,000. That would be a plus 60,000. Bush currently holds a lead in Ohio of 120,000. So it would narrow down that lead, cut it roughly in half, but there would still have to be a lot of play in the rest of the county if my suppositions here are correct.
All right, Michael, this is very interesting. Thank you very much. We'll be back to you. Oh, boy, will we be back to you, and soon. Thank you. Looking at this on the lower left-hand corner of your screen, you see the Bush electoral votes there at 210. We are not officially saying this because we haven't officially called Florida, but we would imagine now that people may be wondering, because they may have seen on other networks, that it's up higher than that. In fact, we believe here at this desk anyway that Bush is likely to carry Florida, but we're being, out of an abundance of caution rooted in the experience of 4 years ago, we're not yet calling it, but that would push his electoral vote total up to about 237. We suspect that soon we'll be able to make some judgment about that. In the meantime, let's check in with Fox News senior White House correspondent Jim Angle, who is down at Bush headquarters. Information on Ohio. Jim?
That's right, Brett. We were just talking about Cuyahoga County, and Michael was saying that could go as high as 180. Bush campaign strategists believe that they will end the night only down 160 in Cuyahoga County, and they say, with the exception of a handful of counties, they are running well ahead of where they were in the year 2000. And one strategist expressed the most optimism I have heard so far tonight in saying there is no doubt that we will win Ohio. It is just a question of the margin, saying that the margin will be somewhere between 100 and 150,000 votes. So they are now beginning to feel very good about what is happening in Ohio and are convinced they will, in fact, win the state. That would make it very difficult, obviously, for Senator Kerry, if that were to happen, difficult for him then to come up with the winning numbers. Now, they are also, they say, ecstatic, as one person put it, about Nevada. And, of course, you never can. There's always a bit of hyperbole in these things, but they are looking at numbers, as I listened to one person listen to the counties as they came in, and a number of them are coming in about where they expected them to, or with the Republicans doing better. Even in Clark County surrounding Las Vegas, they are doing quite a bit better than they expected, so they now also believe they will get Nevada. All of that put together will put the Bush campaign in very good position if, in fact, both those things happen. But as I say, this is the most optimistic I have heard all evening from the Bush campaign, and certainly about the most critical state at this point, assuming, of course, that they will win Florida, which they have been assuming for quite some time.
Jim, I don't want to ask you to identify a source, but characterize for me, if you will, a little bit the person that told you how optimistic and excited they are now becoming about Ohio. Is this somebody that's been a credible source to you in the past, or what?
Indeed, I would call this source authoritative.
Well, I'm glad to know that. Jim Angle, thank you very much. 13 minutes past 12 o'clock at night. Not a single blue state's turned red, nor a red state turned blue. In the fond hope that something there may happen, we'll take a break. Stay tuned. Okay, they're the two key states there, both Bush states from 2000. Florida's about gone. We haven't officially called it, but there appears to be a little question about it at this hour. Let's check in with Carl Cameron up in Boston to see what the Kerry campaign may be having to say about Florida and about Ohio. Carl?
Well, Senator Kerry's made it clear that he doesn't plan on doing anything with the network pool, which is to say he's not going to let anybody see him watching the returns, because the Kerry mood's dampened considerably over the last couple of hours. They have all but conceded Florida now, a couple of networks having already called the state for President Bush. So the Kerry campaign now essentially moving their sights only to Ohio and New Hampshire. For the last week and a half, it had been fairly evident that the three states that Senator Kerry was hoping for pickups in, the three red states that he had a chance to steal, New Hampshire, Ohio, and Florida. Florida now off the table, even by the Kerry campaign's own body language and statements, leaves them with Ohio and New Hampshire. The problem with New Hampshire is it's only 4 electoral college votes adjacent to Massachusetts, so Kerry may have an opportunity there. But the Kerry campaign recognizes that that gain, if they were to have it, could immediately be neutralized by the fact that President Bush seems to be holding on to something of a lead in New Mexico, a state that Al Gore won by the smallest of margins 4 years ago. 337 votes total was the margin, and now President Bush seems to be, at least at this point, with an edge, which could neutralize a Kerry pickup in New Hampshire, which brings us back to where? The Buckeye State, Ohio. And as we talk to the two top officials, one for the Democratic candidate John Kerry's campaign in Ohio, as well as for American Coming Together, this 527 that we've talked about before, which has had literally tens of thousands of volunteers canvassing the neighborhoods of Ohio all over the state for the last 6 months. They are increasingly pessimistic. They do not argue that this is going to be called anytime soon, but with every single conversation, it appears, Britt, they're backing off the timetable, suggesting that it could be later and later, and that we may find ourselves looking at courthouses tomorrow instead of a called race tonight in Ohio. Britt.
Carl, very interesting. If you hear from them what they may be saying, I mean, you heard Susan Estrich with a plausible scenario earlier about Cuyahoga County. As you talk to these people, if you hear more about those counties where they think there are votes enough outstanding and likely carry strength to the point that it could make up 120,000 or whatever vote difference, let us know.
Well, let me just say, Britt, on that score then, Mike Barone's mathematics a few minutes ago, which showed that Kerry could get an uptick, but probably not enough to close the existing lead that the president has with not all the precincts in, is consistent. I quizzed a couple of people on precisely that in Cuyahoga County, and they acknowledge that there is a burst there coming. They're looking for a big surge in the numbers, but candidly acknowledging that it may not be enough to get over the gap the president has right now, so they're also looking at other urban areas. Cincinnati, which has tended to be Republican but does have a large number of Democratic voters, Cleveland and Columbus, Dayton, Ohio as well, states where they believe they can still get up enough to close the gap and top the president, but it is now rapidly a shrinking opportunity for Senator Kerry to pick up any states. Again, New Hampshire and Iowa really the only two left on his strategy list.
Carl, very
Ohio,
interesting.
excuse me.
Yeah, I got you. Very interesting, Carl. Thanks very much. We'll be back in touch with you as soon as events warrant. Now, let's make a quick declaration here about Oregon, a state we expected to go Democratic for president and now has. That adds not much to the sum of our knowledge. And we're also projecting, to the surprise of no one, that California will also go for the Democrat John Kerry. So that leaves us, it leaves us exactly where we've been since this morning. Just kidding. Be right back. Stay tuned. This is something of a technicality at this stage, but Fox News is now going to make the official call on the state of Florida for President Bush by 98% in. He's up, 5%, if that's right. But that bumps his electoral vote total, at least up on our screen, to 237 and leaves him within striking distance, obviously, if he carries of Ohio, of re-election. So we continue to follow that with considerable interest. We also continue to follow with some interest ballot initiatives around the country and other matters within the bailiwick of Greta Van Susteren. Greta?
Yes, two ballot measures we've been watching in the state of Montana. We can now tell you how Montana has voted. They want to amend the Constitution of Montana to define marriages between a man and a woman, and the state of Montana has now voted, and it is yes 63%, no 37%. Of course, that is one of 11 states that has this issue on the ballot, and we're still waiting to hear from Utah and Oregon on that very issue. Other states have all voted yeses to define it between a man and a woman. Another issue is medical marijuana. Yes, 64%, no 36%. Now, medical marijuana is also on the ballot in other states, including Alaska, and Judge Napolitano is right here to tell us, what does it mean in Montana?
Well, in Montana, it requires that you be under the supervision of a caregiver. It doesn't require that you have a prescription or that the caregiver be a physician. So it's going to require some enabling legislation that the Montana legislature will enact, but it's a pretty loose standard under the wording of this amendment that the people of Montana have just adopted by 2-1.
But not as broad as the state of Alaska?
No, not as broad as the state of Alaska, which clearly makes it legal to use, possess, grow, sell, run a business on for anyone without involving a medical need whatsoever.
All right. Also brand new this year, Britt, is the issue of provisional ballots and whether that's going to come back to haunt us in any way as we continue to follow this election. Ken Gross is here Provisional ballots, is that something we're going to see, we're going to hear a lot about tomorrow if this race is still close?
Absolutely. I haven't seen any recent numbers. The Secretary of State of Ohio said there could be as many as 200,000 provisional ballots, which can easily make a difference in this election, and they're in other states as well. And then they had some problems with absentee ballots in Ohio, and they gave the voters provisional ballots. So it's not over until we see these provisional ballots.
All right, back up. It's getting late into the, actually early into the morning, late into the night, however you want to see it. Explain to the viewers about provisional ballots, because this is something new this year.
Well, it's new as
largely.
What happened was that in the year 2000, a lot of people went to the polls and their name wasn't on the voter rolls. So they said, sorry, you can't vote, and nothing could be done. There could be no rehabilitation of those people. They were disenfranchised. Now, as a result of federal legislation, the Help America Vote Act, every state has to implement a procedure that if for some reason you're not on the polls, they say, okay, here's a ballot, vote, we'll put it aside, and we'll see if you should have been able to vote, and if you should, then they count that ballot at that time.
All right, so if the two candidates are within 200,000 votes of each other in Ohio tomorrow morning, we're going to see a lot of we're going to hear a lot about this provisional ballot.
Well, they're going to have to certify the vote. They're going to have to start counting them. They're going to have to sort them, see if they're valid or not. This is not just going through a stack of paper. They're going to have to verify them and say, okay, Jane Doe really could vote.
All right, we'll be following that and much more, of course, to follow. Back to you, Brent.
All right, Greta, thanks. We're now projecting, as you might have noticed on your screen, the president bumped up 246 electoral votes now by virtue of Colorado being added to his total of states. That, of course, is a Bush state, so still we don't have a change. But the president inches within 24 electoral votes of re-election based on the states that have been projected. Bill, the quickest way for him to get there, I guess, would be to win Ohio, which would get him to, what, 266. Alaska's out there. That's, what, 3? 3. So that gets him to 269, which someone might know, which is half of those needed, right?
Yeah, the easiest way to do it is let's Alaska work close for half an hour, so we won't project anything, but this has been a very safely Republican state. So if Bush gets Alaska, he's at 249. Ohio by itself gives him 269 and a tie in the Electoral College, and therefore a victory. And then what's still out there is Nevada.
We say that because the House of Representatives would settle the issue if it came to a tie, right? All right.
Right. Then Nevada is out there where the Bush people seem confident, though the raw numbers are very, very, very close. And then New Hampshire, which Bush also won, like Nevada, and Ohio, which he might lose this time. New Mexico, Iowa, and Wisconsin. Those are the only, there's 6 states, I believe, still in play. Ohio, Nevada, New Hampshire, New Mexico, Iowa, and Wisconsin. Bush needs 20 electoral votes from those states. The easiest way to get them is to win Ohio. The next easiest way to get them is to win probably Nevada, New Mexico,
Is Michigan been called? I can't remember.
No, I'm assuming Michigan and Minnesota don't come through for Bush just based on the raw votes, though we haven't called those two.
All right. Let's, I guess we've been kind of counting them as likely carry states.
Yeah, but I mean, if they come through, Bush is in good shape.
Wisconsin, the last time we went around, Kerry's lead went up from 9,000 to 17,000, and in actually in New Mexico, Bush is up by 11,000 according to this last tab. In Iowa, Kerry is up by 12,000.
Maybe we could get some. Wouldn't it be fun to have some boards on the states that we're talking about here?
There are only 6 I think we would need. I mean, really, to be following now, frankly, which is Ohio, Nevada.
Well, let's take a look at Nevada when we can. Let's take a look at Wisconsin when we can. See what those boards might be able to tell us about raw vote totals and so forth in those states. Obviously, we want to look at some point at I guess I mentioned New Mexico. Yeah, well, there you go. There's Ohio. That 129 or 130,000 vote lead persists. We're now up to 79% of precincts in. Everybody seems to have a story in each campaign about their path to victory there, a comeback by. Now, Nevada, Kerry up slightly, 3,000 votes, or 2,000 plus votes there, 3,000, I guess. And Wisconsin, Kerry up by, what, 15,000 votes plus, with a lot to still be counted. Iowa, similar situation, 17,000 votes there for. Now these we're talking here in this case, except for Nevada, about all red blue states that would be pickups for the president.
But it's looking to me, looking at these states, that they're not necessarily coming in for Bush, and in that respect, Ohio may be. I'm not so sure there's an alternate path to victory in truth if Bush doesn't win Ohio. Now, the good news, I think, for Ohio, just to follow up on Susan Estrich and Michael Barone's math for Bush in Ohio, is this, if I do the math correctly, there are about 800,000 votes left out in Ohio. Bush's lead is about 130,000. Now, if it's all urban areas, it could split big enough, 520 to 290. I mean, you can get that kind of split, but that's 130,000 votes is getting to be a pretty big number if there are only 800,000 votes out.
While we're talking about this, let me interrupt you for a second, not to get everybody off their train of thought, but we've got a call we can make in the Oregon Senate race out there. That's Ron Wyden, the incumbent. I don't think anybody thought he was going to lose. You can see he's wildly ahead. Looks like he's got the guy doubled at this stage. A lot of precincts still to go, but we project him a winner anyway. That doesn't move the ball in the Senate configuration at all. He was expected to win. Let's take a quick break, come back, discuss Ohio further as we await results there. Stay tuned. Those 9 states re-rate too close to call are now what this election is all about, and mostly about a tiny handful of them. Michigan, we haven't called. It looked like a state that would carry comfortably. He's up there by, 73,000 votes, but with only about half the precincts counted. So we got a way to go there in Michigan. I don't know where the stuff is, so we can't tell whether those remaining precincts afforded the president a real opportunity to catch up to a lead of that size or not. But it's not that big a lead, as you can see, 73,000 votes. We're also, of course, awaiting results in Wisconsin, Iowa, Nevada, New Hampshire, Minnesota. But of course, the main prize we're talking about now is Ohio, and it is beginning to look, as we go on here, Kerry's playing catch-up out there, which is not to say he won't win it, but it gets harder by the hour as more votes trickle in, and the remaining votes that are still out there to be counted get smaller. There you see it now, the president up by about 133,000 votes, and that becomes a more significant margin with each passing period here.
Kerry needs to win about 60% of the votes that are out, which you can do if it's an urban area, but you have a state that's going 50-50 or 51-49, and you're asking that the outstanding areas produce a 60-40 margin for Kerry to draw even, basically. It'd be very interesting if Michael Barone could do his magic and discover in the next few minutes exactly where those remaining 700,000 or 800,000 votes are. No, it's very hard to do, but you can get the general counties, as Michael was explaining, but then if you don't know which precincts it is within the counties, you don't know whether it's Democratic or Republican areas.
They don't know if it's Cleveland yet, Cuyahoga County, and they don't know exactly where it is in Franklin County around.
Maybe Michael can call the Ohio Secretary of State to find out.
Right. As our legal expert, however, pointed out, there may be 200,000 provisional ballots in Ohio. If that's the case, you can be sure that the Kerry people are going to say it's not over until all those provisional ballots are adjudicated, and this could take days, weeks.
Okay, and let's take you'll notice that the Kerry electoral vote count is just ticked up by 1 to 207. That is because we have now allocated in our count to Senator Kerry a 4th electoral vote in the state of Maine, which he won. There's a complex formula by which a single electoral vote out of that state's 4 is awarded. So we gave him the 3 were decided early when we projected he carried the state. This 4th one has now been awarded to Senator Kerry. I'm sure he's glad to have it, but I doubt he's focused very much at this hour on the state of Maine. So we continue to chew over this. Now, here's a few boards here. Look, there's Ohio. The president up by 128,000 votes, 82% of the precincts reporting.
Shrinking a little.
That's shrinking a little. The vote, his lead has shrunk, but it's been in the 120 to 130,000 range now for an hour or so, or at least it seems like an hour to me at this hour. And Wisconsin, 24,000 vote margin for Senator Kerry with a lot of votes still out there.
That's widening.
That's widening for Kerry?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's move on here. Iowa, 14,000 vote margin. That's about what that was, isn't it? For
It was
Senator
17,000.
Kerry?
Actually, it's a little down now.
Yeah, 76% of those in. President closing slightly in this latest round. President up now by 14,000 votes in New Mexico. That's a more meaningful margin in a state the size of New Mexico than it is in some of these other larger states. That's, what, 5 electoral votes in New Mexico?
That's right, and that's a little larger than the last time we...
All right, and in Nevada, the president's trailing now by what, 5,000 votes, 4,000 plus votes. That's an important swing state.
It is, and that precinct's number is wrong, I'm sure.
I think there's more than that in there, yeah. Although that's, that state's grown a lot. And in New Hampshire, the president down by 9,000 votes with...
have they given it to Kerry?
Have we called New Hampshire for Senator Kerry?
No, we can't.
We're just calling it now, folks. We have news. I'm always the last to know these things. I apologize. These screens on television always know more than I do, and they did this time. So we now award New Hampshire to Kerry. That is the first switch. The first red state to go blue. Not a blue state has yet gone red. This was the one, I think it's fair to say, that the Bush team thought it had the greatest chance of losing of the states they'd carried 4 years ago. So Senator Kerry picks up the, what, four electoral votes in the state of New Hampshire and bumps him up to 211. Doesn't greatly enhance his chances of winning because redistricting had given him, now you say Minnesota, Kerry up there, but a lot of votes still out. You'd have to figure that with a 124,000 vote lead, he'd be in good shape. So we're not ready to call it, though. I was just going to say about New Hampshire, it was a near tie last time. The president won by, what, 2 electoral votes or something like that. But the states he carried ended up with 7 more electoral votes, so New Hampshire alone can't even it. But it helps.
It helps greatly. Everything helps at this point. 12:30 at night. Everybody wants everything they can get.
Oh yeah, we're now projecting that race in Louisiana is over, and that Congressman Vitter will become Senator Vitter. Almost everything is in there. He had to get 50%. We're showing him at 51 at the moment. That means no runoff and 1 more seat for the Republicans in the Senate, putting the possibility of what does that give us? That gives us 54-45 with a couple of states still out there, Colorado and Alaska that they could lose, that could get it back to 53-47. That would be a net pickup of 2.
Well, and South
Dakota's still out there, so they can't lose it.
Yeah,
right.
The ones we know that are out there, they can't. So there's no way, I think we're now in a position where we can all but say that Fox News projects that the Republicans will retain control of the Senate, something that's not been much doubt.
Project. You don't have to all but project. You can project.
Well, I guess we can now project that based on...
that was a very impressive race by David Vitter. Nobody really expected him to get to 50%. He has been a House member for several terms, former Rhodes Scholar who, I think, Mike Barone will know this. I can't remember when we've had a Republican senator from Louisiana.
No, it's never happened.
Never happened. And so it's remarkable. Republicans have now swept 4 out of the 5 southern seats. Mel Martinez is narrowly ahead in Florida. That would be the 5th. And this is where Democrats were most vulnerable. I would also add, Brit, in House seats, Republicans it looks now like they're going to gain House seats. They've knocked off 4 incumbents in Texas, thanks to the Tom DeLay gerrymander. 1 retired, Jim Turner, and 1 famous Republican has lost, and that's Congressman Phil Crane from Illinois, who, remember, ran for president in 1980, unsuccessfully. He's been defeated. He's from right north of Chicago in the suburbs there. Nick Clooney, running in that Kentucky House seat that used to be Jim Bunning's seat years ago, and his son is George Clooney, the actor. He has lost that seat. It is a conservative seat, and
he's a...
Nick Clooney's a Democrat. He lost to the Republicans, so that's a pickup for Republicans.
Been quite a family feud if he hadn't been.
And in Georgia, a rookie Republican congressman named Max Burns has lost, and we have sitting right here the world's greatest expert on that House seat, Juan Williams.
Well, and lost to John Barrow, Democrat, black. The district, demographically, should never have been a Republican district. Should have been a safe seat for the Democrats, but last time around, what they had was a scandal involving the son of the former Speaker of the Georgia House, and suddenly Max Burns was there, and the Republicans tried to support him, made him president of the freshman class and all. I thought he had a good shot to come back, but people worked very hard to reclaim that seat, and apparently John Barrow has won tonight.
Interesting. Let's take a look at the popular vote nationwide. We got a ways to go here, but it's getting to the point where now we really do have some numbers. We got 71% of the precincts in across the country, and the president is up by 3%, which is, well, would be better than he did last time.
And it's a lot better than the exit poll.
Well, you know,
Well, California.
we could just have, if Ohio goes against him, we could have Bush winning the popular vote and losing the electoral vote, which is a flip of the last time around.
Yeah, I wouldn't count on that.
I wouldn't count on it, but it could happen.
There's a lot of California popular votes still out there, and I don't know how that popular vote's going to end up. It'll end up pretty close, I suspect.
You mean the popular vote nationwide will end up pretty close? You don't think the California popular votes end up very close?
Although all the Kerry votes from California.
What do you think? California would be like 55-45 or something like that for Kerry?
Yeah.
Boy, he does. That state really, ever since Ronald Reagan's career ended out there, California has been going south for the Republican Party.
Yeah, but this time the Bush campaign did something wise. Remember, in 2000, they spent about $12 or $13 million there, lost the state by 12 points, a state that Al Gore never visited the campaign.
Fox News is now projecting that President Bush will win the state of Ohio. Fox News now projects that President Bush will win the state of Ohio by whatever margin it turns out to be. That means that the president is now within 3 electoral votes of re-election at 12:41 and 20 seconds this Wednesday morning. President Bush, we project, Fox News projects, President Bush has won the state of Ohio. His margin is now up to 138,000 votes. We're not sure exactly how many are still out there to be counted, but 83% of the precincts are in. So this begins to look like the president needs very little else to win. If he wins New Mexico
or Nevada
Alaska
or
Alaska
Alaska
brings him to 269.
Alaska brings it to a tie, which means that if these results hold, and we think they will this time, there's no way at this hour, unless there would be a stunning presidential upset in Alaska, that we can see that John Kerry can win this election. Now, we don't have anything from Alaska.
Well, Alaska's a state.
The polls are still open in Alaska. They could win.
Alaska's a state that Bush is expected to win by 25 or 30 points, as he did last time.
Our decision desk has been so cautious tonight, and for them to be projecting Ohio, they must know what's outstanding in Ohio.
Well, you want to check in
overwhelmingly
in a minute here, when Michael
Barone
Barone is ready to talk to us, we'll check down there with him and see what the basis of this decision was.
There are also some legal issues in Ohio, and they must be pretty confident that the margin won't be just a few hundred or even a very single-digit thousand votes.
Okay,
I think if the margin gets above 10,000.
Bill, let me interrupt you to go to Michael right now. Michael, this is, of course, we still haven't had a state change hands, but this is the big enchilada so far. What do you know about the decision?
Well, I talked with the decision desk people, and they took the approach looking at the tabulated vote, not relying on exit polls in a state this close, and they gave an analysis that was roughly similar to one that I presented on this show and on Fox Broadcasting News, and that is to say that even if the Democrats, even if John Kerry gets a big margin out of the 1/3 of the precincts still left open,
not even that many, Michael. Is it that many left still?
It's not that many. It's about 25% of the precincts left in Cuyahoga County.
Gotcha.
There aren't enough reservoirs of likely Democratic votes among unreported precincts to get John Kerry over the top, and there are some reservoirs of Republican votes, notably in Hamilton County, which includes Cincinnati, and therefore it's our analysis here at the Fox Decision Desk, the analysis of the decision makers, not of me, that this state popular vote is going to George W. Bush.
So all that would appear to be left, Michael, based on what we're counting out here, is barring a Kerry upset in Alaska, and he would have to, run the table on remaining states, including Alaska, in order to get to 270. If he doesn't win Alaska, we have a tie. And if we have a tie, the election goes into the House. and the president would be reelected by virtue of the vote in the House of Representatives, correct?
That's correct. And from what we've seen tonight, I've been scanning the House races from time to time. We went into the election with 30 states having a majority Republican delegation. It seems likely that we'll come out with approximately that number, at least 26 or more, which is the number needed to elect a president in the House.
All right, so we now watch carefully these other smaller states, New Mexico, Iowa, Nevada, and Wisconsin still is the biggest one, but he doesn't need enough electoral votes for Wisconsin. He only needs a handful now.
If Bush wins Alaska, and if we're right about Ohio, he's now ahead in New Mexico, and it looks by a decent margin.
14,000.
And that would give him a majority. We won't have a 269 to 269 nightmare.
Okay. We won't have a Bill Kristol posits that we won't get there. We're going to take a break now, but before we go, let's review the call we just made. Fox News projects President Bush, the winner of Ohio, brings his electoral total to 260 within just a few votes of certain re-election. The big one. It is not a switch. This projection we've made about Ohio for President Bush, but it is a decisive matter. 140,000 vote margin now for the president in the raw vote tally. That is more than it was a little while ago. And of course, as the vote trickles in, the opportunity for Senator Kerry to regain the lead, of course, diminishes. And so we have now projected that state into the Bush column, pushing his electoral vote total up to 266. In about 12 minutes now, the polls are going to close in the state of Alaska. And when they do, we may be able to project a winner in that state. We're not sure we will, but we may. And if we do, and it is President Bush, as the pre-election polls suggested it would be, that would push him to 269, as we've been discussing here. 269 would mean that the best that Senator Kerry could do would be a tie tonight, and that tie would, of course, send the election into the House of Representatives. Now, obviously, with this result in Ohio, as close as it is, I wouldn't expect any concession from or declarations of victory, although who knows, tonight. I do think that, though, that election challenges are likely. Ohio was forecast to be the Florida of 2004. Florida's been called some time ago. So we await, obviously, with interest, further developments and more of the raw votes as they come in from other states that could provide, put President Bush at or over 270, which would mean he would have an electoral college majority and would win the election outright.
It'd be interesting to know what Carl Cameron is hearing from the Kerry people about.
Well, we'll check in with Carl as soon as he's ready to be checked in with. Mort, thank you very much for that, advice to us.
The one thing I would say is, I mean, if this lead holds up in the 100,000 plus range, that's a big lead. I mean, it's a close race. It's a 51-49 race. But remember, I think the rules in Ohio are that you get an automatic recount if the margin is less than half a percentage point. Right now, the margin is over with about 1.5 to 2 percentage points. About 2 percentage points, 51-49, if there are about 6 million votes. So I mean, we'll see where the final number is, but I think this is a big enough number to be not really challengeable through lawsuits or through recounts. If it drifts down to 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, then we're in a different world. So.
Well, we haven't seen Cuyahoga County. The decision desk had to make this decision, as Michael was saying, based on the idea that there are reservoirs of votes, especially up in towards Cincinnati, that they believe are not yet counted, that would counter anything that would come in late from that Cleveland area, but we haven't seen exactly how extensive or how large it might be.
Well, remember though, the models that they're working off of come down to a 1 in 300 chance of being statistically of being wrong. So as we sit here tonight, we're looking at long odds here.
Well, New Mexico incidentally looks like it's going for Bush. So
what does?
New Mexico is Bush now has a 15,000 vote lead with
79% of the vote.
And that's 5 electoral votes right there.
So then he would get if he holds Ohio, he has a majority. if I'm right about New Mexico and if Alaska comes through in 10 minutes.
9 minutes and 18 seconds as we speak in counties. Let's look at that now. That is a lead of 19,000 votes, 79% of precincts in a state that size. That is meaningful. Agreed?
Yeah, there are only about 80,000, 85,000 votes out, so a 20,000 lead's pretty big. It would have to be a 50-30 split.
And it's growing. I mean, the count has been building a little bit each time we swing around to it.
Okay, let's take a look, if we can, at what the automatic, the statute in Ohio, the rules in Ohio are with regard to automatic recount. This matters. Yeah, well, 1/4% or less of total vote. That's pretty tight.
Well, if there are about 6 million votes in Ohio, that would mean about 15,000 margin. Anything above that, there's no automatic recount.
So that's not an automatic recount. That doesn't mean that a recount couldn't be requested, I presume, by one party or the other, and I don't know who would grant that. I have a hunch that if it was going to be granted, it'd be granted by some court. But all of this remains to be seen. One has the sense that there's a chance here that this might be settled. But let's assume, let's see how far we can see this lead going without Ohio. I mean, assuming Ohio is contested, we'd have to be in a situation where reversing it would give Kerry the election, Senator Kerry the election, and that means that he would have to run the table of the rest of the states, basically, wouldn't he?
Yeah, you have to pick up Minnesota with 7, Wisconsin with 10 electoral votes.
Right. Iowa, if he won Ohio, he wouldn't need those so much.
Well, that's right, if he won Ohio. But I'm saying that was your point, that he'd have to run the table of the rest of them to get himself in the position where Ohio would be determinative, and therefore the court would say, we got to review this or allow for a recount.
Right. Well, so Kerry looks like if he's ahead, if he holds his lead in Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Minnesota,
he'd be within shouting distance.
He would be within shouting distance. Ohio would be the determinative state, even if Bush holds New Mexico and Nevada. So Ohio looks like the key state.
Yeah.
As it has from the beginning, and always shall be, I guess. I mean, in this election anyway. I mean, Ohio has been it, and but this looks like a substantial lead in Ohio. I mean, if it holds, and if it can't be challenged.
Let's get that board back, if we can, on Ohio, and so we can sort of further examine that count. Now it's down to 101,000 votes.
Yeah.
That's shrinking.
That's shrinking.
14% out.
But of course, the raw vote total is still coming in, but it's getting less. 86% of precincts now reporting. 103,000 as we look at it, click away here. That was down from 130 or 40 a little while ago. So this must be, we're beginning to hear from pockets of Cuyahoga County.
Well, we've been saying, at least I've said many, many times, that all these precedents that have been set in the past are just there to be broken, but maybe the Ohio, as necessary for any Republican to be elected president, maybe that is a precedent that really does matter. Because it doesn't look like Bush would have, to me, that he was going to win re-election without holding Ohio.
No, I don't think so either. Let's turn to, let's look at some of these other close states if we can. Just as I look across here in the room at our monitor here, Michigan, Kerry up now by what, 182,000 votes, or 82,000 votes. 82,000 with some room to go there. I wonder if that could close.
It's closer than Ohio.
It's closer than Ohio. Yeah.
More vote outstanding.
More vote outstanding. That's how many electoral votes? That's what, 17 for Michigan, right?
It's a widening lead, though.
Is it?
Yeah, it was 73,000 the last time we checked.
Okay. Michigan is one still outstanding. There are others, and as they appear, we will go over them with you. Minnesota, 119,000 vote lead there, it looks like, for John Kerry, 59% in. That looks substantial, at least at the moment. You don't know what's still out in Michigan.
That was the state that the Bush people did not think they could win.
Right. Well, but they campaigned there a lot. I mean, the president campaigned there a lot. He hoped he could win. I think you mean as of this morning they didn't think they could win.
Yesterday.
As of yesterday, right. Wisconsin, 24,000 votes with, well, there's a lot there. That's still tight. Oof. 1 percentage point or less, perhaps. In Mexico, that begins to look like a significant lead. 20,000 votes, small state. 80% in, 5-point lead for the president. Iowa, Man, that's down to 1,000 votes. That's a dead heat. So Wisconsin and Iowa together are what, 17, something like that?
Or Iowa, Nevada, and New Mexico together are 19. I'm sorry, 17.
Now we haven't seen much from Nevada lately. Let's look at that. Kerry's still ahead there. Is that narrowing? I think it is, isn't it? Yeah, that's narrowed a lot, and not much of it in. So that's anybody's ball game.
The last time around it was 3,000.
What is it now?
3,000.
Yeah, okay. And Hawaii, we don't have squat from Hawaii, as you can see here at 3 minutes to the hour of 1 a.m.
But the Iowa.
Okay. All right. We're going to go to a break here real quick, and we'll be right back. Thank you. Polls will close in Alaska at long last, and we're going to take a look at the state and see whether, based on what data may be in and what exit polls have told us, that state provides a big enough margin for the president that we could call it for him, which would mean that we'd be at 269 for the president in the Electoral College, and see what happens. In the meantime, of course, we're keeping an eye on the other states, and we're watching to see if Ohio gets close enough to make it exciting for some people tonight still. We're about a half minute away here from the 1 a.m. hour. As of now, though, this looks like this Fox News has projected John Kerry to have lost the state of Ohio. That's not, of course, a pickup for President Bush, but it is the biggest deal of the night by far. So we watch to see what else will fall, to see if 270 is reached, and we're coming up on 1 a.m. We now do project the state of Alaska, as the polls have just closed there, for the president by what looks like a substantial margin, which would mean that the electoral vote count now stands at 269 for President Bush by our projections against 211 for Senator Kerry. And that would mean that if this was the way it ended up and Kerry won everything else in sight, Senator Kerry won everything else in sight, that the election would be a tie. Let us go to Fox News correspondent, Chief White House correspondent Jim Angle, Senior White House correspondent Jim Angle, who is with the president's campaign manager. Jim?
Hello, Brit. Yeah, we're here with Ken Mehlman. Ken, obviously Ohio was big for you.
Yes.
What about Nevada?
We feel very good about Nevada. We're confident we're going to win Nevada. We actually did better on the early and absentee votes statewide, and particularly in Clark County, than in 2000, which is Las Vegas. That's the part of the state the Democrats typically do the best. And if you look at the numbers, we came out with a greater, or they came out with a less of a margin this time than they did in 2000. So we feel very solid about Nevada.
Now, about 80% of the vote in Nevada is in and around Las Vegas. Is that right?
It is.
You were prepared, as I understand it, to lose about 25,000 votes there.
Yep.
And at the moment, you're down about 3.
Well, ultimately, what happened is that Las Vegas, as you point out, came in a lot closer than we expected it to. And yet, a lot of folks in Las Vegas vote early, whereas the rest of the state, where Republicans typically do better, voted today, voted later, and we're going to do even better there.
Now, at this point, can you see any combination of states that would give Senator Kerry a victory? What could he put together that would put you in trouble?
I'm confident the president's going to be reelected. I think he was reelected today. The numbers are showing it. We're obviously very excited about it. We think it's a real statement by the American people of the need for strong leadership in the war on terror. We now need to come together as Americans behind the president's leadership, come together and together work to make our nation safer, more prosperous, more hopeful, and that's what we look forward to doing.
Do you see any states at all that you won in 2000, other than New Hampshire, going to Senator Kerry?
Sorry to see New Hampshire go. I think that we actually may win some other blue states. I think Wisconsin remains very much of a toss-up. New Mexico remains a state we could win. Iowa remains a state we could win. And, of course, both Michigan and Minnesota remain very close. So at the end of the day, I think that I'm confident with what we've won, and I think we could win some other states, too.
Oh, come on. You've given up on Minnesota, haven't you?
Well, until Fox News calls it. That's my test.
Okay, Brit, there you go. Even hanging on to the hope of winning Minnesota, which I think most people here would say is long gone. But there's Ken Mehlman, a very optimistic Ken Mehlman at this point in the counting of the votes. Brit.
All right, Jim, thanks very much. Let's go back, if we can, to that scene there at headquarters. Maybe we can listen in on that a little bit. That is at the Reagan Building in Washington, and I can't see what they're all looking at up there on the stage, but they've obviously, you can see there's some TV monitors around the room. For all I know, they may be looking at us or they may be looking at others. I'm given to understand that one other network has now called this race in Ohio for President Bush, and so this story that we had on an exclusive basis remained exclusive for about 20 anxious minutes here has now been joined by at least one other network. Of course, they're looking at the same data we are, and doubtless we're close to the same conclusion at the time we made ours. Let's look in on Carl Cameron at Kerry headquarters, outside Kerry headquarters in Boston. Carl?
Well, it's just nothing like what's going on there in the Ronald Reagan building in Washington, D.C., Britt. This crowd here is not only getting drizzled on by a light rain in 40-degree temperatures in Boston, but it's just chilly because they look up at the big Duratran TV screens. They see the results. They see the call in Ohio, not only our own, but someone else on other networks, and they're getting pretty bummed out here. In talking to the Kerry staff in Ohio, as well as here in Washington, D.C., they have not gone the route of Karl Rove 4 years ago. They haven't called the networks and said, we challenge your call of the state of Ohio. They seem to be in the process of resigning themselves to the loss of what was perhaps their last best hope to pull out a victory here tonight. But they do have a couple of things that they point to, suggesting that it may not be over in Ohio for a variety of reasons. First of all, Cuyahoga County, which we've been talking about at some length, the Kerry campaign now claims that their returns, which show about 93% of the area in, have them up 201,000 votes, which they suggest will be reflected in the raw numbers shortly and will bring the margin closer. They say they're up 40,000 votes in Franklin County, another Democratic county that they intended to do well in. And lastly, and this is perhaps the most telling, they are now pointing out that there are between 200 and 250 provisional ballots in Ohio. Ballots that will now presumably be checked, rechecked, and perhaps counted.
You mean 250? You mean 200 or 250,000?
250,000
right, okay.
provisional ballots.
Right.
But even with all 250,000, Britt, splitting the difference and giving Kerry a vast benefit on it, it's not going to be enough to close the gap that appears to be on the numbers right now.
All right, Carl, thanks very much. We'll be checking back with you as events warrant. Let us know if we expect to hear anything, any formal statement of any kind from the Kerry camp tonight. One senses that we're not about to hear a concession anytime soon, and of course one can understand why. We still don't, still states to be determined that will determine whether there's 270 at least projected into the president's column. We have a call to make in Colorado on the Senate race, and this is a pickup for the Democrats that the Attorney General there, Ken Salazar, defeats the beer company heir, Mr. Coors. This was a close race. It was thought that Coors might be able to make it up in the end. Now, you saw it switched over to the presidential outcome there. President Bush, we project, as others have, the winner in the state of Colorado. So far, the president is on the cusp here of winning the 270 electoral votes to be required. He sits, as you can see from our screen, at 269. Which would be a tie, tossing the matter into the House of Representatives, where Republicans control, which would mean he would be reelected, but not by the path that he wanted. So we look to a handful of smaller states at the moment to see if there's one that would put the president over the top. You just heard Jim Angle's interview with the president's campaign manager, Ken Mellman, who spoke of Republican confidence in Nevada. This is a state the president carried 4 years ago and was expected to carry again, but where the early vote tabulation had put Senator Kerry ahead, and for all we know may still have him ahead. I'm not able to see that right at the moment. There's also New Mexico, where the president has a lead that has looked in our recent glimpses of the vote tabulations out there to be solid. If not final. Let's check in now with Michael Barone, who's down with our decision desk, for further word on the thinking that went into the call in the state of Ohio, and for his reaction to the what we just heard from Carl Cameron reflecting the Kerry camp on whether there still are some votes out there that might make a difference.
Well, the analysis of the decision desk was that there just doesn't seem to be enough votes left out there for John Kerry to carry Ohio. Even granting Cleveland, which now shows up on the board with a margin for John Kerry of 190,000 votes. It's better than Al Gore did 4 years ago when he had 166,000 there. But there's only now 147 precincts left out, only 10% of the precincts left out in Cuyahoga. So it doesn't seem likely that that can dent a 117,000 vote margin for George W. Bush statewide. And there just aren't that many other counties with votes outstanding, with precincts outstanding, that seem likely to go Democratic.
Michael, are there still areas out there where President Bush might pad his lead?
Oh, yeah. You've got places, I'm just looking, Paulding County in northwestern Ohio. That's an area that went, there's no precincts reporting from Paulding, but it's right next door to Fulton County that went 62% for George W. Bush, and it's the same kind of area with the same kind of voting history. You've got let's see, what other areas have we got here? You've got 49 precincts left in Medina County. Medina is southwest of Cleveland. This is on I-71, Brit. It's one of those places where they're building new subdivisions, new shopping centers, mega churches, fast growth. It's gone heavily Republican. A lot of Republicans who used to live in Cleveland's Cuyahoga County, their kids moved out to Medina County, and that's a Republican-performing county, so that's probably more Republican votes out there. So there are some Republican votes out there as well as some Democratic votes, and on that basis, it doesn't look too likely that it looks really impossible to our decision desk that John Kerry can surmount that 117,000 vote margin that's sitting there currently on the boards.
Michael, just for the sake of the people who might not have heard you and me speaking during the 6 o'clock hour tonight about the makeup of our decision desk, in addition to the data that they receive, which is from a consortium financed pool of information and analysis, all the decision desks all around town are looking at the same information and most of the same analysis. But who are those people? What are their political affiliations who have made this call tonight?
Well, there are people among the four of them. They have some have a background in political science, in academic statistics of a very high level, well above my pay grade as a statistician. We also have people who have had a background in both Republican and Democratic politics, and they've been reaching their decisions unanimously in a consensus. You know, I can overhear them sometimes arguing out this point or that point. Does this make sense? Weighing the figures. It's a consensual and harmonious group where I think everybody there has respect for the opinions of the other people, and I have respect for the opinions of all of them.
It's probably, Michael, worth noting that we who are out here on the air were somewhat, well, not frustrated, but somewhat puzzled, I think it's fair to say, at how long that same group of people out there took in making the call in President Bush's favor in Florida. We were probably last to make that call. Same thing, though. Same group, same relationship.
Yeah, we wanted to be sure that that this call was correct. Obviously, nobody here at Fox News forgets the controversy that attended this network and other networks who called Florida first for Al Gore and then for George W. Bush, when in the circumstances it never should have been called for either one of them or projected. They should not have been projected as a winner given the razor-thin margin of popular vote that actually turned out to exist.
Michael Barone, we'll be checking back with you as the night goes on. Thanks very much. We need to take a break here at 1:12 in the morning Eastern Time. We'll be right back. On the very cusp of re-election tonight. His vote tally stands at 269 electoral votes. He needs one more from somewhere to go over the top, as they say. We're also keeping track of Senate races. The most dramatic in terms of the people involved Senate race tonight is the one in South Dakota, which we have rated too close to call all evening. You see that John Thune, the challenger, is up 5,000 votes with 85%, excuse me, of the precincts reporting. We're not prepared to call that race. South Dakota is a pretty thinly populated place, and 5,000 is a significant lead. What we don't know, as I say this, and we'll find out shortly, is where all the outstanding votes in the remaining 15% of the precincts are. And that obviously accounts for the reason why caution dictates that no call be made in that race. Also in Florida, we have a very close race there. That's a 72,000 vote lead out of 7 million, roughly just under 7 million cast for the former Housing Secretary Mel Martinez over Betty Castor, who was the president of Florida Atlantic University, University of South Florida, excuse me. That has been a close race all night. We don't think, even with a 70,000 vote lead, that we're going to be able to call that race anytime soon, but we'll keep an eye on it. Daschle now trailing, were he to lose a. Now the margin for recount in Florida would be 0.5%. If the margin were 70,000 out of 7 million, 1%. So that's 1%. Wouldn't be enough. If Martinez were to go on to win. We're not projecting him the winner, of course, at this point, but we're just keeping track with you of the automatic recount rules to get a sense of how much automatic recounting there will be going on. We haven't seen yet, we haven't identified a state yet where the margin of victory as we projected, or the lead upon which we're making a projection has been enough to trigger an automatic recount. Now, there may be states where recounts are requested and recounts are granted by the discretion of some state official or other, but it's not automatic yet anywhere. So we await results from such places as Iowa and New Mexico and Nevada. We particularly are interested at this stage in New Mexico and Nevada, because the president is leading in New Mexico. He was trailing slightly in Nevada and had been throughout the evening. But as we've been hearing, the returns that were heavily from Clark County, which is Las Vegas. And Las Vegas is a Democratic stronghold. Other parts of the state, while they're thinly populated, are not nearly as thinly populated as they used to be. And they tend to come in more Republican. And Ken Melman, the president's campaign manager, who couldn't get the smile off his face while he was being interviewed by Jim Angle, was expressing some confidence about that state. So we continue to watch that with some care. Just as we look at it now, that's down to a lead of just over 199 votes. So that's not much. With only 24% of the precincts reporting, so we'll see. It'll be likely to be a while, though, from the look of it, before we'd be able to make a call there. So we watch also, with some interest, New Mexico as well. Let's check back in with Michael Barone to see if he can give us any sense of those two Senate races, the Thune race versus Daschle in South Dakota, and the Castor-Martinez race in Florida. Michael.
Well, the Thune-Daschle race in South Dakota, this is a very close race. This has been closely contested. Two candidates went into it about whom most South Dakota voters had positive feeling. We're seeing John Thune lead by 5,000. Our decision desk is taking the same approach to this race it's taken to a lot of the presidential races and the close elections. That is, make sure you're right before you call it. I would point to a couple of things here. Shannon and Todd counties, the Sioux Reservation counties, they have not reported yet. 2 years ago, John Thune lost the Shannon County by 2,800 some votes to 200 votes. It's more than 92%. That obliterated his margin in the rest of the state. So that's obviously got a possibility of putting some Democratic votes on the board, although I'm told by South Dakota newsmen that the number of Indians registered in Shannon County has not increased in the 2 years. So we'd expect 2,600 Democratic vote margin or something of that magnitude in that area. Todd County should add to that. That's another reservation county. In counter disposition to this is Pennington County. Pennington County is Rapid City. That's the biggest city in the part of South Dakota they call West River. West River meaning west of the Missouri River that seems to divide the state into a rather agricultural, green, bucolic eastern half and wind-blown, dusty plains and mountains in the western half. And Pennington County, it's the second largest county in the state, that has voted heavily Republican in the past. It gave John Thune a margin of in the vicinity of 21,000 to 13,000 votes 2 years ago. They've got 27 of their 46 precincts have not reported yet. Only 10,000 votes are put on the board. We don't know which precincts they are, but there is a good prospect for John Thune to get a significant margin over Pennington County. And if he does that, he will probably win this race.
What about, can you tell us anything about Martinez and Castro now, or should we come back to you for that?
Well, Martinez and Castro, I can't, I've got to punch this up on the board.
That's all right. Well, Michael, look, we got to take a break anyway, so let me
Okay.
just check back with you. We'll take a break, come back to you after that, and we can discuss the that Florida Senate race. Thanks, Michael. Take a break here. Be right back. At 1:22 a.m., we're on kind of a watch here to see if there will soon be one more state. It doesn't matter which state it is or what size it is, because of where this this electoral college vote total is poised. 269 for President Bush. That puts him within a single electoral vote of re-election. There was some thought earlier this evening he might have gotten that out of Maine. Now we're looking at New Mexico. Here's a state which could give Bush a victory. He's up 21,000 with 84% of the precincts in. New Mexico is, what, 5 electoral votes? That would do it. We're not prepared to call it, however, based on what's still out there. 23,000 vote margin with 86% in a relatively small state. Looks very close to being callable.
Keeps growing.
Just let me interrupt this disquisition on small states to learn more about one very big state, the state of Ohio. Secretary of State of Ohio, Ken Blackwell, is with me now. Ken Blackwell, we called Ohio some time ago. Subsequently, another network has done so. I know you're a Republican and you're glad for the news. Does it square, in your estimation, with the vote totals that you have seen?
Britt, I let you all make those calls. Let me just go and we're going to count every vote that was cast today, and we're going to do it through a bipartisan system that can ensure that the final total will have the full confidence of the folks in the state of Ohio that it represents the true will of the people. But it was a robust day, high turnout, just a record turnout.
What do you estimate? How many people do you estimate voted in Ohio compared to last time?
Probably about 5.8 million, which would be to 5.9 million, which would be about 1 million more people. It was a record number of folks to turn out. We're projecting about a 72% turnout.
Wow. Now that compares with what you had. If that's 72%, what were you in the high 50s or?
Well, in 2000 we were at 63%, and in 1996 we were at 65%. This is a real spike. But what's really important to realize is that the absolute number, the raw number, is just 1 million more voters. And what it really did is it tested our system, and our system worked. The strength of our system really did rise to the occasion on today. We had people standing in line for hours, and on last evening I said to them, let us take control of this election. Let's take it out of the hands of judges and lawyers and you know, the political operatives, and that's what they did today. Folks said, we're going to make this call. Now what they're saying to me, if it takes 2 hours, if it takes 2 days, if it takes 2 weeks, just give us a good count. And that's what we're going to do. So I'm hoping that some of these other states take us out of play.
Oh, in other words, you don't want to be the decisive state, huh? That's because you're worried about lawsuits? Is that why?
Oh, no, I've had 23 lawsuits, Britt, and I won them all. And that was helpful. It actually proved to be helpful that we could get some of these things resolved before the votes were cast and before the votes were counted. But I can tell you, I had lawsuits running from about 60 days all the way to the wee hours of the morning yesterday until right before the polls closed. I had a judge, say that we had to keep the polls open at the request of the Democrats past 7:30, and then I had the Democrats call and say, "Oh, just a joke." So it's been quite an experience. But at the end of the day, the people of Ohio did themselves proud because they took control of this election.
Let me ask you a couple of questions about recount possibilities. We have on the screen now the recount rule for an automatic recount in your state. I guess it's 1/4% or less of the total vote has to be the margin for a recount to be triggered. We were looking at margins for the president in the raw count as it was tabulated in excess of 100,000 votes. I presume that would probably not be enough, correct?
It wouldn't be enough, but here's the scenario that would stretch this out a little bit. If at the end of the day, because we had 1 million new voters registered in the state of Ohio, and so that means that a good number of the folks who came out today were casting ballots for the first time. Many of them might have cast provisional ballots. In 2000, we had just over 100,000 provisional ballots, and 90% of them were good. But since we don't start counting those provisional ballots until the 11th day after the election, if the margin of victory for one candidate or another is comprised of fewer votes than provisional ballots that we have, that could stretch it out. That's why I said, my folks here have said, look, the strength is in our system. If it takes us 2 more hours, takes us 2 more days, it takes us 2 more weeks, we're going to give you a good, honest count.
Well, let me ask you again. How many provisional ballots were there issued today and cast?
Well, we are still tabulating them, but they were running at about a 30% higher clip than 2000.
Which would put you at where?
Which would put us close to 140, 150,000.
All right. Now, were they predominantly in particular areas that would give you an idea of how they might break? I mean, were they?
Well, the New York Times notwithstanding, the fact of the matter is that we don't have those party affiliations designated on the new registrations, and there was a tremendous registration drive, not just by unions, but by churches. We had an issue on the ballot which defined marriage as a union between a man and a woman that won almost 65-35. And that means that was a real driver. And what I know is that a lot of registrations, new registrations, came around that effort. And I just heard some of the analysis beforehand. Evangelicals, were real drivers in this election. Some 25% of the folks who turned out, most analysts are predicting were, evangelicals.
All right. So that would suggest to you that the provisional ballots would basically split somewhat along the lines of the way the rest of the state had gone, or perhaps even be even more conservative, right?
All right. Well, I think at minimum it probably would split the same way.
All right. This is of interest, very much of interest, Mr. Secretary. We thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right. The Kerry Edwards campaign manager has released a statement. I have it, but I want to hear about it from Carl Cameron. Let's check in with Carl up in Boston.
Well, thanks very much, Britt. We were here 4 years ago in Austin, and it seems to have happened again. The manager of the campaign now saying that the call, they just aren't buying it. Mary Beth Cahill has put out the statement that reads, quote, "The vote count in Ohio has not been completed. There are more than 250,000 remaining votes to be counted. We believe when they are, John Kerry will win Ohio." So just as we were 4 years ago, a called state now being disputed by the candidate who didn't win it in the calls, and the Kerry campaign digging in with all the numbers, and as Mrs. Cahill suggests, still 250,000 votes as yet uncounted. They think they've still got a chance here to eke out a win, even though they would have to virtually win almost all of those 250,000 votes to overcome the 130,000 deficit that they've got with Senator Kerry right now.
It's 1:30 in the morning, we're now looking at a lead for the president of 134,000 votes. So I guess if Kerry got all of 250,000, he would overtake the president and win going away. But obviously,
every vote.
Well, he wouldn't have to win every vote, but he'd have to win a huge majority of them. Probably a I mean, in a massive majority of them in order to win, to overcome a lead of that size. You know, it's probably not, you know, I suppose if the Kerry camp wants to take the position, if this ends up along these lines, that they can pull it out from the provisional ballots and whatever assorted other votes are still out there, I guess, you know, they can be forgiven for hoping, but it looks a little bleak unless there's some change within the remaining 10% of the precincts still out there. And as you heard Michael Barone say earlier, Carl, some of those precincts, it is believed, may pad the president's margin, and perhaps substantially. So one wonders how wishful this is.
And you've got a situation, Britt, where between the Kerry campaign with its 3,000 lawyers, 27,000 volunteers, several hundred paid staffers, several hundred out-of-staters all descending on Ohio for this final weekend, plus the outside independent groups there, they are going to make sure that every single one of those resources is used to the last available moment to keep this alive, because if Ohio goes, their hopes may be dead.
Okay. Carl, thanks very much. Appreciate this. Let's check in now with Greta Van Susteren, who has got a couple of legal experts with her. Not that she's not one herself, she certainly is, who can discuss these issues of election law, challenges, recounts, and the whole 9 yards. Greta?
Well, Britt, I'm really lucky tonight because I do have special help here. And I'm going to start with Ken Gross. We're going to talk about, of course, Ohio, provisional ballots. That's where our eyes are going to be on tomorrow. But before we get to provisional ballots, there's one thing that we haven't heard anything about tonight. We don't know if there's a problem, but the people in Ohio voted what way? What was the methodology, Ken?
70% of the voters, believe it or not, used the good old-fashioned punch cards that we saw back in Florida in 2000. They have a little better system, though, than they had in Florida, because they actually have a law that says there's a uniform standard for the whole state, and they say if at least 2 corners of the chad are detached, it counts as a vote. Now, again, we don't know if there are irregularities or if this is going to make a difference, but it's not as reliable as some of the more modern voting equipment of electronic equipment.
And we should remind the viewers, we have not heard from the Kerry campaign that they're in any way challenging that particular vote, but it certainly is, it's almost unique to Ohio that either Florida got rid of that system, but Ohio is like the only state left, at least with such a high concentration, 70% of the voters.
Yeah.
All right.
It doesn't seem as though the underlying vote, the vote that's already been tabulated, is even challengeable. The Supreme Court in Bush versus Gore said whatever standard you use, it has to be uniform across the state. Ohio provides for that. And Ohio law itself does not grant the automatic recount with the president having a margin as great as he does. So it looks like the only thing that might come in play in Ohio would be the provisional ballots. How many are valid? And of the valid ones, how do they break between Senator Kerry and President Bush?
All right, provisional ballots, Judge. We've always had provisional ballots, but something happened. The federal government got involved in the business of provisional ballots in 2002.
Yeah,
How?
The federal government enacted a statute called the Help America Vote Act, which required every state, when a person was challenged and insisted on the right to vote, that vote be recorded in a provisional way, literally provisional, only to be counted if the number of provisional ballots is greater than the difference between the 2 candidates. We've never had this before on a national basis, so we really can't predict the outcome. We don't know if these provisional voters are more likely than not to be valid voters or are likely to be valid voters. We may find out in the courts of Ohio, or it may not come to that.
And of course, there's some states like even Wisconsin, where provisional ballots would be irrelevant, for instance, because they have same-day registration.
That's right. In Wisconsin and Minnesota, they actually don't have to have provisional ballots, because if you are not on the voter rolls when you come to the polls, you just register and you're in and you can vote. So that sort of takes the place of it. But, you know, I don't want to overemphasize the hanging chads, but there is an error rate built into that is higher than others. Even if the standard is not challengeable legally, there is a possibility that there is a miscount. The problem is we're looking at over 100,000 vote margin now in Ohio. That's a big margin to make up.
But I suppose if you're in the Kerry campaign tonight, that may be a high margin as to the chads, but you also take into account that you've got absentee ballots that haven't been counted, and you have anywhere from 200 to 250 is the projected. I don't know that to be. I don't know that to be the true number of provisional ballots, but it's certainly the number that's sort of hanging out there. People are talking about.
You have the voting equipment issue, the provisional ballots, the absentee, and maybe a tightening of the vote. All that together, there may be something there.
All right, Britt. Well, we're watching it. We don't know exactly what might happen in Ohio, but that's the law. Should anyone challenge it? Back to you, Britt.
All right, Greta, thanks very much. As we've just been discussing here, for this to all get to be plausible, it would take a significant tightening of the vote out there, which hasn't yet happened, but we're keeping a watch on it. We're going to check back out there in just a little while, but in the meantime, we're taking a break. Be right back. One more state can now be added to the Kerry column. This is Minnesota, which Fox News now projects will go to Senator Kerry. It leads there, as you can see, by about 110,000 votes, with 30% or more of the precincts still to go. We don't think the president can make that up, and we declared Senator Kerry the winner, and the winner also of its 10 electoral votes. This was a state where President Bush had some hope late in the campaign and did some campaigning there, but as of a day or so ago, it was believed that that state was gone to Senator Kerry, as it indeed now has. So that tightens things a little bit, but not very much. Let's see. We're just looking here for. We got. Let's take a look at the remaining 6 states that are still to be called for president. They total 48 electoral votes. This is New Mexico. The president with a 23,000 vote lead, 88% of the precincts in. That looks very close to being able to be called, which would give him the election, but not yet callable. Nevada. That has narrowed throughout the evening. There are only fewer than half of the precincts are in, and Kerry is clinging to a 2,000 vote lead. If double the number of precincts were in and it was a 2,000 vote lead, that might be meaningful, but it's not that meaningful at this stage, and it's basically a dead heat. Iowa, the president up now by 7,000 votes. He lost that by what? Just less than that, didn't he, 4 years ago?
Yeah.
92% of the votes in. The president narrowly ahead, and Mort Kondracke, who's been following Ohio like a hawkeye, tells me that margin has grown a bit. Wisconsin, Senator Kerry up 26,000 votes with 79% in. That looks like a lead that might hold. Michigan, Senator Kerry looks like he's beginning to pull away there, 109,000 vote lead, but some distance to go in Michigan. So we remain in need, if we're looking for a call in Hawaii, we don't have enough from Hawaii in to tell you very much, folks. Sorry about that. We remain in need of one state if calling the race, and finally is what it is about tonight. We need one state for President Bush. There are several where, as you can see there, he's close to getting, but he hadn't gotten it yet, and therefore here we are at 1:40 in the morning on Wednesday morning, the day after Election Day.
Hey, Britt, stop and think a minute. How much this looks exactly like 2000.
Boy, doesn't it?
I mean, even the states that we've seen New Hampshire, a state that Bush won by 1 percentage point. He's lost this time. He may pick up New Mexico, which he lost by 600 votes in 2000. And he may pick up Iowa, which he lost by just a couple thousand votes. And everything else stays the same. You know, the red states are red and the blue states are blue for the most part.
Has he won a single Kerry state?
Not yet.
Not yet.
He hasn't won a single Kerry state.
But he's ahead of
state.
He's ahead of New Mexico, and he's ahead in Iowa. We see the Democrats are strong in the Northeast and on the Pacific Coast, and the Republicans are strong in the South, the Southwest, the Plains, and the Rocky Mountains. There's some Democratic strength in the upper Midwest, but it's exactly the same. The map has barely changed.
And we're still watching for the possibility of a call, that Senate race, Mel Martinez versus Betty Castor in Florida. Let's check in with Brian Wilson, who's been keeping track closely of the Senate races tonight. Brian?
Well, this is a very, very close race. If we could go to the board, we'll show you just how tight this race is right now in the state of Florida. Mel Martinez is ahead by about 1%. Now, Fox News has determined this race is too close to call. Nobody apparently told Mel Martinez that, and he went and gave a victory speech just a short time ago. Take a listen to what he had to say.
I want to work in the next 6 years as your senator to let you know that I will be representing all Floridians, all of Florida. That'll be my job, that'll be my task, that'll be my quest.
So there you have a victory speech by Mel Martinez. However, it is still very, very close in the state of Florida. Betty Castor is not very far behind. And I must tell you, Brit, though, it looks pretty good for Republicans tonight. They're largely running the board in the very competitive races, and it is possible that before the night is over, there may be as many as 55 Republican seats in the U.S. Senate. Right now, John Thune is leading by a significant number, although that race also too close to call. And it looks like maybe even in Alaska, Lisa Murkowski may pull that one out.
That, of course, Brian, had been that was kind of thought to be gone. She, of course, was appointed by her father. And people thought that was nepotism, which by definition it absolutely is.
Yeah, it was pretty controversial, but she started making comebacks late in the game, and Republicans rallied around her. You know, they have a Republican member of the House there. There's only one in the state of Alaska. And Ted Stevens came to her rescue, and in the last days there was one poll that showed her up by 5.
All right, well, that's really interesting, Brian, and we'll be checking back with you as we go here. Thank you very much.
You bet.
Let's go to the Ohio board. To see what's happening now. We're up to 92% of the precincts in, and the president's lead stands at 102,000 votes. That is significant. We were talking now about getting an awful lot, a massive majority for Kerry out of the remaining votes that are out there.
Right. I mean, I think,
of course, we don't know where they all are. Michael might know, and we can check with him to see in the fullness of time here. But it looks, you know.
I think it's appropriate for the Kerry campaign not to concede on the basis of a projection and wait for the whole reported vote to come in. I'm struck that they have not threatened, it doesn't sound like, lawsuits at this point. And I think if this margin holds, something like it, it's going to be hard to pretend that provisional ballots would split so lopsidedly, or that lawsuits would make such a difference as to make up 100,000 margin, which is a big margin. It's a 1.5% margin.
And by American recount standards, of course, if those votes are counted in a couple of days, that'd be nothing.
Right. Well, but I'm saying, Fred said this is like 2000. Obviously, the country is like 2000, but it's very different in a couple of ways. If this 100,000 margin in Ohio holds up and Bush wins New Mexico, there will be a clear, non-litigation influenced winner in the presidential race. That's a pretty big difference. Secondly, it looks to me very much as if Bush is going to win the popular vote.
Well, we can look at that. We have a board on that. We'll try to bring that up in a minute here.
So I think there will not be, an electoral vote, popular vote disparity as there was last time. And from a Republican point of view, Republicans lost, was it 4 or 5 Senate seats in 2000, and this time they're up what?
They could
be up 4 Senate seats.
Yeah, 4.
It's a pretty. I mean, that's a pretty. So I think in that respect, it's not
what was
like
the net
it's
gain?
not quite
what
like
was
2000.
the net gain? Juan, do you remember what the net gain was for Republicans in 2002 to take
in
the Senate?
Yeah.
I think it was
3.
Yeah,
2 or 3.
It's very small, because, and then you had Jeffers at that point as a Republican. So yeah, but you know, let me just go back
he'd
to
gone. He'd gone.
Let me talk about Ohio for a second. Mary Beth Cahill says she believes there are 250,000 votes that are still out.
I don't think she means tonight. I think she means overall, not counting provisional ballots.
No, that's about right tonight. If 8%, 10% of the vote is out of 5 million.
Okay, and Kerry has about 100,000 deficit. So out of that, you'd have to say then you got about 120,000 left if he just made up. If he got that,
he'd have to win them all.
No, not
all. No, almost all.
It's 250,000.
I know, but
he's only 100,000 down. So then you're left with about 120,000 or so left, and the question is how that 120 would split. So you're looking at he would have to win 3/4 of that 250, and that's the calculus we're looking at the moment.
Well, we're also looking at where they are. I mean, if they were all in some hotbed where we thought, oh, this is a Democrat city here, that would be something you might entertain. But if Michael has made it clear to us from what he's seeing that there's some in Democratic strongholds, but there's some Republican strongholds with votes out there as well that would be likely to offset that.
Yeah, but the Republican strongholds like Hamilton County are just smaller population centers. So, I mean, the possibility is there, but I would say at this point, it would require, as we just described, that Senator Kerry would have to win 3/4 of the remaining votes, which is a high hurdle.
It's not going to happen, and that's why our decision desk is right. But here's the question for the Kerry campaign. If the provisional vote number, if there are 150,000 provisional votes and the margin's 100,000 votes, the truth is you're not going to make up 100,000 vote margin out of a 200,000 votes. They're not going to split 150 to 50. But will the Kerry campaign insist on keeping this alive for 11 days until Ohio recounts all the provisional ballots on the principle that in principle, Kerry could win 80% of the provisional ballots, I suppose, and they shouldn't concede the election before then. That's going to be a question for them.
We also won't have the same level of sort of instability and uncertainty created by that, because the apparent winner will likely be the president. If the apparent winner is the president, he will simply continue. His administration is in place. You're not going to have this issue the same way you did before, where you got two challengers, really, who can't form an administration. And the atmosphere will be very different in that respect. Let's talk now. We're waiting, among other states, for... all right. We're getting ready to go to Michael, but we're going to break first and get that out of the way so we can come back and talk to Michael Barone about Iowa and New Mexico. Stay tuned. What, 3 million, 82% in. Perhaps that betokens a win in the popular vote, something the president, I'm sure, would dearly like to have after not doing so 4 years ago. We've heard some sort of Democratic scenarios about how the vote could turn in Ohio. Let's get a Republican scenario on that now from a guest who is with our colleague, Jeff Goldblatt, Fox News correspondent, who's out in Columbus, Ohio. Jeff?
Hi, Brit. Actually, we're in Cleveland this evening with the chairman of the Republican Party, Bob Bennett. And one of the things the Republican Party told us to look at early on was a trend in Cuyahoga County. And would President Bush be able to have a threshold in this county of what?
Well, we thought we were going to hold it down to about 150,000 vote loss, and it ended up being about 218,000. So I think that the rest of Ohio did well by the president today.
And you know you needed to hold that margin below 250,000, correct? And why is that?
Well, our model showed that if we didn't hold it below 250,000, it'd be a dead-even race in Ohio. So we were pretty confident that we had a good grassroots effort. The president's message resonated well. The campaign in Ohio by both Senator Kerry and President Bush was pretty much like a gubernatorial race here, the number of times they appeared in Ohio. So it energized the grassroots organization of both parties, the candidates did. So there was a tremendous effort to get everybody to the polls today, and we were fortunate to get our voters out in the rural and the smaller ring counties, or the collar counties around the urban counties.
Although Fox, of course, has projected Ohio to go in the GOP or be a red state, one of the broadcast networks still not calling this state, and the Kerry campaign is saying, wait a minute, don't call this so quickly. Why are you so confident that this state is going to the president?
Well, the margin, the unofficial margin is going to be between 125,000 and 150,000 votes. 14 years ago, we had a very close race for Attorney General in Ohio, 3.3 million votes cast. It was decided by 1,234 votes. It was less than 5,000 votes on election night. It held. Our boards are very good throughout Ohio. They're bipartisan. They know how to count ballots. They know how to take care of the provisional ballots and follow Ohio election laws. So it's not going to change that much. That's certainly outside the margin of error.
In this state before the election, you heard so much how critical the Democratic and the youth turnout was going to be and the urban turnout. In the end, it seems to be that the core conservative voters came out. Why do you think that was the case? Did it have anything to do with the fact that marriage and the definition of it, what is the definition, was on this state ballot for voters out there?
Well, I think that the issue helped certainly in getting out the grassroots Republican vote, but at the same time, the president's message and the president's programs, 4.4 million Ohioans got a tax cut under President Bush. I think that the message that the president brought to the Ohioans resonated very well. His fight on the war on terrorism, the war in Iraq, were all issues that the voters of Ohio understood and supported the president on.
Bob Bennett, chairman of Ohio's Republican Party, congratulations to you. Thank you so much for joining us. One of the things he was telling us just a couple of minutes ago that we didn't get a chance to ask him about provisional ballots. He does not feel that they will be a factor at all here in the final vote total, that the president in this state has garnered enough of a vote total where the provisional ballots will not be a factor. Britt, back to you.
All right, Jeff, thank you very much. Sorry I misidentified your location. Thank you again. Let's check in on the question of two states where the president has been leading, but we're not calling, Iowa and New Mexico. Let's check in with Michael Barone, who's down with our decision desk. Michael, what can you tell us?
Well, I can tell you in Iowa, Brit, popular vote, we're looking at George W. Bush with about 11,500 vote margin. That margin has been widening as we've gotten results in from Dallas County, which is immediately west of Des Moines, which is in Polk County. They're named after James K. Polk and his vice president, George M. Dallas. We've had some results come in from some of the rural counties like Kossuth County coming in for Bush. In addition, we've still got only about 124 precincts left out of 2,079, about 6% of the precincts going. Some of those, like there's 11 precincts from Calhoun County, that's a Democratic county. There's 11 precincts from Muscatine County, that's a Republican county, or Democratic county, excuse me. Those seem to be, so far as I can tell, reasonably well balanced. So you've got a county like Montgomery County in the far southwest of the state, the Omaha media market, which is pretty heavily Republican. I think it's unlikely. I haven't given it the kind of precinct by precinct analysis that I would if I had a greater amount of time, but my conclusion is it's unlikely that this Bush margin is going to be overturned. And so George W. Bush, who lost the state of Iowa by less than half a percentage of the vote in 2000, seems likely to carry it by less than 1%. The other state you're talking about is New Mexico. And here, the mystery is, the question is, what's going on here? And the biggest question is Bernalillo County. We've still got nearly 50 precincts out of 413 in Bernalillo County that are uncounted. That's Albuquerque. It is a swing county that goes both ways. Also, we've got just north of that Sandoval County. Used to be rural and Hispanic. There's now a town called Rio Rancho. We don't know what's going to happen there.
So your sense is, Michael, that it is unlikely that Kerry will recover in either of these states, but it's just not certain.
It's not certain, that's right. When you got Bernalillo County out there and you're not certain which kind of precincts it is, I would be unwilling to say that 27,000 vote margin that George W. Bush currently has absolutely positively cannot be threatened.
Okay, Michael, we'll be back with you soon. Thanks very much. We're going to take a break here in just a couple of minutes. But if the president won every state that he'd won before, he'd have what right now? He'd have 278, but he lost New Hampshire. So, but he's still not at 274, right? 273. So we're still waiting for something here. Nevada, that's the one we're waiting on. That's the one red state that the president could still win that would seal the deal, as it were. We've got to take a break. Be right back. We've got to take a break. Be right back. Well, it's about 2 o'clock in the morning, America, and as you saw that graphic there, 269 electoral votes now for the president, putting him within a single electoral vote of victory, is what we now project based upon the fact, principally in the last hour or two, that Fox News has projected him the winner in Ohio. So and if it ended up 269 to 269, that would throw it in the House of Representatives, where it can be safely presumed, as a result of what I'm about to tell you here in a minute, the president would be voted back in. Now, let's look at the Senate. It appears tonight the present count is 53-46 based on the races that have been decided so far for the Republicans. There are two outstanding that we haven't called yet. We haven't called Alaska yet, and we haven't called, what else? South Dakota, that's right, the Thune, and Florida we haven't called yet. If all of them went Democrat, it wouldn't be enough, be 50-49-1 again. But it appears possible that Murkowski, who's ahead in Alaska, can win. It appears possible Martinez, who's already claimed victory, could win. That would get it up to 55. And we could end up with a 55-45 Senate. Nobody thinks it could be much better than that, but the trend has certainly been in the Republicans' favor. They gained 2 so far, could gain a couple more. In addition, the House of Representatives, which we haven't said a great deal about tonight because it was safely in Republican hands under any scenario that anybody could imagine. Now, the AP has a trend that it is projecting that looks like the Republicans may pick up a few. seats, and according to these are estimates by the AP, and it would show a net gain of what, 3 votes for the Republicans in the House of Representatives, extending their control over the House for another 2-year term. So that is the broad national election picture at this hour. President on the verge of victory, it appears. The Senate appearing to be more Republican this next time around, as does the House of Representatives, all of which is a strikingly different picture, at least in the terms of the presidential race, than we thought we were going to see tonight for a few hours this afternoon. When the first cut of the exit polls came out and showed it appeared that John Kerry was winning everywhere, not every single state, but all the contested states appeared to be headed his way. Florida appeared to be well within his grasp. A popular vote majority seemed to be his tonight. And this was, of course, after a bad experience with exit polling 4 years ago, and a worse one, it can be argued, 2 years ago, when the Voter News Service exit poll cratered, collapsed, couldn't be, and ended up not being usable.
Right.
So now here we are tonight, 4 years ago, 2 years later, 4 years from the original problems we had, with an exit poll that appears to have been wrong in important particulars. Now, in fairness, I suppose we have to say that this margin of error, that the poll was in the margin of error. It's just too close. And it may be, we may be reaching the outer limit of our ability to poll with any precision because this country is so closely divided.
But you know, the exit polls systematically over-predicted the Democratic vote by about a couple of points.
Go ahead, Juan. Earlier we were talking about this issue of legitimacy and how this time it's a matter of transitioning from an administration that is incumbent, and therefore it's not 2 challengers who would have to set up an administration. This is an opportunity for George W. Bush to continue. But I must say, I think that what you're going to hear from the Democrats is, one, questions about what happened in terms of the National Election Pool Survey, which would seem to have indicated something very different than what the actual numbers indicated. Right. So I think there's going to be a lot of conspiracy theories spun out about that.
Yeah, but how does why would the Democrats spin the conspiracy theories? If anything, the sense of momentum that was whispered, that flew across this country for Senator Kerry, among political professionals and readers of internet websites, and I mean, the buzz, such as it was in political circles, was all for the Democrats winning.
Right.
I don't see how that could have helped the Republicans.
No, I said it's going to. What the Democrats are going to say, when people were asked as they were leaving the polls how they voted, the indication was they had voted for Senator Kerry.
In other words, the Democrats will believe the exit poll and doubt the raw vote?
That's what I'm saying to you. And the second thing is, I think
Juan is absolutely right. There are going to be insane conspiracy theories about Depot. What's the name of that company that makes all the voting machines? Depot, that's located in Texas and has sinister connections with Bush. I don't think the mainstream will. This will not go to the mainstream, but there will be a lot of that.
But so far we've heard none of that. I'm frankly surprised.
It usually takes a couple of days.
Well, okay, but there haven't, that there weren't fistfights in polling places between groups of lawyers.
That we know of.
Well, that we know of. But there doesn't seem to be, the conspiracy theories certainly haven't started yet, and it doesn't sound as though there will be. And I don't see how you can quarrel with a national vote this big, a presidential margin this large, and state after state after state going.
How is it large, Mort?
Well, it's going to be 51, 49 or something like that. That's 2 points.
Yeah, by contemporary American standard, that's a stupendous landslide.
Right. I think it's going to be, it's a very close margin. I think there are a lot of people who are going to say what happened between the exit polls and the actual count of the votes.
The exit polls were wrong is the answer.
Well, could be.
They were wrong.
I'll accept that.
Well, remember this. In these banana republics, and some of these countries to whom elections are not a way of life as they are here, you're always suspicious when the exit polling done by reputable companies like the one that did ours finds one thing and then it comes out differently in the vote. So you can imagine that there will be. I think Juan is, the more I think about what he says, the more sense it makes. He's right.
Yeah, I know, but it's absurd without evidence. Now, if Democrats can come in with
the standards of evidence in America in political terms have shrunk.
Well, then we can just dismiss it as a stupid conspiracy theory.
Before we get too far afield here, let's take a look back, if we can, at Ohio. 96% of the vote is now in there, and the Bush lead is up to 120. Well, it looks like 123,000 votes, which means it's been growing as the returns have continued to come in lately. So we're getting down to brass tacks here, where it's becoming, I think, mathematically almost beyond reach here.
That's a full 2%. That's a full 2% of the vote, a clear 51-49. I don't think that can be overturned by provisional ballots, by quarrels about particular. One site may have made it difficult for 92 people to vote, but when you're talking 100,000 votes, I wonder if Senator Kerry will concede tonight if this popular vote plays out and Bush wins by 125,000 votes.
Well, I think given the antagonisms that persist from 2000, I don't think he's going to concede anything. I think that, in fact, the lawyers and his partisans are going to push him to contest it.
I don't know, though. It's one thing to contest. Look, to be fair to Al Gore, we can criticize some of the legal tactics, but it's one thing to contest a 1,000 or 1,200 vote margin, whatever it seemed to be that night. To contest a 120,000 vote margin, when every state Bush will have won, if I'm not mistaken, there will be no state that's very, very close. It looks like New Mexico, assuming he wins it, he'll win by, again, 1 or 2 percentage points. Nothing will be within half a percentage point that Bush will have won to make himself the president.
I mean, we were within.
So I do not believe
we were in automatic recount territory.
Right, in 5 states.
In 5 states or something. I mean, it was Florida, of course, New Mexico, Iowa, Wisconsin, and where else was there?
New Hampshire.
Well, that's 4 states. All right, let's look at the New Mexico board right now. 28,000 votes with 93% in a state the size of New Mexico. That's a lot. It's not what you call a landslide, but it's 5%.
It's 28,000 votes with how much of the vote left? 7% still outstanding.
Right.
There was one huge difference in 2000 that we don't see here, and that is Bush had lost the popular vote in 2000. Now he's 3%
we didn't know that
ahead.
for sure for a while.
Well, we knew it. We knew it by
because there was
early in the morning.
he was behind in the popular vote when we woke up the day after, and when there was some thought that the absentee ballots, which were said to be so numerous in California, might change that.
It wasn't,
but it didn't happen.
I mean, the margin in Florida was infinitesimal. I mean, this is 100,000 votes in Ohio.
And we've got him up. He's up 3% nationally, with 85% of the vote having reported. Now, maybe there's some whoppers out in California that can change the atmosphere, but one wonders.
This margin will be greater than the margin in terms of how many votes would have had to have shifted in X number of states to elect the other guy. This margin will be greater than the margins in 1976 and 1960.
Let me interrupt you, Bill. I apologize. Carl Cameron has some information about what may be next from the Kerry side. Carl?
Well, thanks, Britt. We're expecting a couple of possibilities. First, that running mate John Edwards may surface here at the rally site in Copley Square, downtown Boston, sometime in the next few minutes. But more importantly, though we can't say exactly what it means at this point yet, of course, Senator Ted Kennedy, Edward Kennedy, the senior senator from Massachusetts, is at this moment with Senator Kerry at his townhouse on Beacon Hill, about a mile from here. In Beacon Hill, of course, very posh neighborhood. He happens to live in the very posh neighborhood within the posh neighborhood of Lewisburg Square. Senator Kennedy visiting now with the Kerrys. Throughout the course of this evening, Vanessa Kerry, the senator's daughter, has been seen going in and out a number of times, sometimes appearing to even be consoled at the doorway. Teresa Heinz Kerry has also arrived, as has a number of others. But Ted Kennedy's arrival here at 2:10 in the morning, with Ohio now off the table and things looking particularly bleak for the senator, may mean that there is a very serious conversation underway on Beacon Hill as to what Senator Kerry is going to do next.
And of course, it would be interesting to know, Carl, or to, if we could, about whether the always combative and partisan Senator Kennedy, whose brother was the beneficiary, 44 years ago on election night, and in the days after the election, of a Richard Nixon concession, despite the arguments of many around then Vice President Nixon that the election had been stolen from him and that he ought to contest it. And Richard Nixon, who was no slouch as a partisan himself, decided at that time that he would not do that, that it would be bad for the country. One wonders, of course, in the light of that, what advice might be given by that senator's brother, the former president's brother, tonight.
Britt, I can tell you that Senator Kennedy's fingerprints on the Kerry campaign throughout the last year and a half have been unmistakable. His chief of staff, Mary Beth Cahill, is serving as Senator Kerry's campaign manager. Bob Shrum, a longtime speechwriter and strategist for Ted Kennedy, is advising Senator Kerry, and really did seem to sort of emerge in his presence and his rhetoric in Senator Kerry's speeches in the final month of this campaign. So indeed, Senator Kerry has been, throughout this campaign, one of the strong suits. In fact, he threw early on in the primaries and caucuses tremendous labor support for Senator Kerry that made a big difference in Iowa and New Hampshire. So he has had a profound effect, and this meeting may indeed be a profound discussion as to what Senator Kerry might do before the evening, or I should say now the morning, is out.
All right, Carl, thanks a lot. We're going to take a brief break here. Well, in a minute we're going to take a break. I'm sorry.
When it looked as though Kerry was going to win this thing because of the exit polls, there was discussion in the Kerry camp of what kind of a speech Kerry would give, and it was going to be a unity speech. It was going to be, you know, bring the country together and all of that. Now, this confab between Kennedy and Kerry, would be very fascinating to see whether Kerry comes out with a unity speech and tries to unite the country, or in Kennedy's case, Kennedy has been a firebrand all the way along, and I would like to think that Kennedy would rise above that now, if indeed it looks as though Kerry can't win and do the unity thing.
I think he will, because I think it is important to the Kennedy family. They know what Nixon did with a narrower margin in Illinois and Texas, the two states that put Kennedy over against Nixon in 1960. I believe in a considerably narrower margin than it looks like Bush is going to have in Ohio. I think Senator Kennedy would, and also Senator Kennedy being such a hero to liberals and to the left wing of the party, would have the credibility, if he stood with Senator Kerry, I think, to convince perhaps parts of the Democratic Party not to go into the fever swamps of conspiracies that Juan was correctly describing, that some of them will go into. So it would be an act of statesmanship, I think, for Senator Kennedy to emerge with Senator Kerry, assuming the popular vote plays out this way. We're a little premature. We haven't seen all the popular vote in Ohio that we've called it. We haven't still seen the additional state, presumably New Mexico or Iowa, that will push over the top. But I've got to think that Senator Kennedy does not want to be the person who throws us into in this case, I think, pointlessly contested election with the lawyers for the next 2 or 3 weeks.
I'm not prepared to say that Senator Kennedy, whom I've known for a very long time and have always gotten along with, lacks a bipartisan bone in his body. But I think it is fair to say that if he has those bones, he hasn't shown them lately, which is not to say that they won't be on display tonight. What is your take, Juan?
No, I think, I'm all for bipartisanship, and I think the country is in tremendous need of coming together.
I'm sorry, Juan. I want to get your thoughts when you come back. We have to take a break because the network computer is about to take the show away from us. We'll be right back with Juan Williams. Vote margin for President Bush, with all but 4% of the vote, all but 4% of the precincts having reported. We don't know where they all are. Michael Barone might, but that we'll see if that lead holds up. And we're looking also at New Mexico as we go forward here. And we're going to look back just for a second here at Ohio. I'm not sure the board will come up, but the tally is up to 96%. And I'm told that the raw vote total shows the president now with a lead of 128, that looks like 128,000 votes, with 97% of the precincts in. So that lead is actually expanded since an hour ago when we first began talking about whether there were enough votes left out there to turn the thing around for Senator Kerry. We concluded that there weren't. If there weren't then, there certainly aren't now. But before we went to the break, Juan Williams was talking about this question of what kind of advice Senator Kerry might be getting tonight about whether to concede or to fight this every way you can fight it. What do you think, Juan?
Well, I think that given the antagonisms that existed in 2000, and given the feeling that in this campaign there was so much disparaging attack, if you will, on Senator Kerry, I think that what you're going to hear from Senator Kennedy in terms of his advice is you've got to make sure that every vote counts, that everybody who's believed in you, who's fought for you, who stood up for you, feels that you have taken this to the mat. And in that regard, I don't think, despite everybody saying, well, he should be bipartisan, I think it's easy to say if you're on the winning side, he should be bipartisan. But from the Kennedy perspective, from the Democratic Party regulars, who, as I said, I think are going to be highly discontented to the point of throwing up their hands with disbelief at the results, I think they're going to want to push it and make sure that Ohio and the punch card ballots that are still in place in Ohio, that everything was done absolutely correctly. They're not going to be afraid to say, we're challenging it, and we're challenging it under a letter of law.
Juan,
they have to have some evidence. Just because they don't like the result, that's not enough. You have to have some evidence. You have to be close enough where your evidence shows that you might have won that state, absent something that you say is wrong had happened. So right now maybe they'll come up with something, but it's not enough just to say that, well, Democrats are unhappy and they're dissatisfied because they don't like the result. Therefore, they have to challenge
but Juan's not saying that that's what the case would be built on. He's just saying that the political sentiment that would animate the politicians involved would be such that what he's saying, you'd fight it any way you can fight it. You're saying you'd have to have evidence. That may be true, but that doesn't mean evidence. I know, but he's talking about not a decision about whether they have evidence. He's talking about a decision about whether you take whatever evidence you have and do the most you can with it.
Yeah, I know, but not when you're that far behind. You're going to have overwhelming evidence when you're 125,000 votes behind, 3.5 million votes behind right now, at any rate, in the popular vote. And I don't think that evidence is going to exist. And Democrats may not like it, but sometimes you just have to accept defeat.
Well, during the break, I was talking to a former Democratic official who is well connected, and he says that the owner of the Boston Red Sox, who is Fred's favorite team, John Henry, is chartering planes to ferry lawyers into the state of Ohio to go looking for whatever evidence they could possibly find in whatever case they can possibly do. And also, I heard that they've stopped counting in Iowa because the vote counters are exhausted and there's been some machine breakdown, so we may not know what the Iowa result is tonight.
Oh boy, happy day. Well, we're getting to the point now where we're getting to the outer limits of our own coherence here. Not that we, some viewers may think we passed it a long time ago. So, what better thing to do at such a moment than take a break? Well, that wasn't a very long break. Florida Senate race, Mel Martinez has claimed victory, and he may have it, but we don't know for sure. And South Dakota, that race has barely budged in a while. 92% in, 6,000 vote margin for John Thune, the challenger over the minority leader Tom Daschle. Very closely watched race. And Lisa Murkowski, she was expected to lose big, I think. And she's not losing right now in that state. 61% in, and she's got a 16,000 vote lead, which you can see constitutes 8% of the vote thus far cast. So that raises some Republican hopes from further gains. If Thune holds on, if Murkowski holds on, I guess we'd get to, what, 54-46, and then there's one more
Martinez,
still out there, and then Mel Martinez in Florida. If his victory declaration pans out, that would get to 55 Senate Democrats. 55 is a nice number, but in the contemporary atmosphere in the United States Senate, it isn't a number big enough to automatically get your program through, get your judges confirmed, or a lot of other things. The filibuster is now, instead of an exceptional weapon, the tool of last resort. It is a commonplace of Senate life. If the bill, the idea, the resolution, the nominee is controversial, you got to get 60.
55 is a lot more than 51, though, obviously.
Yeah,
and I would say this: Bush, the president, is responsible, I would say, for 3 or 4 of those senators. Don't you think? He won Alaska by, probably 30%, and may well have helped Murkowski beat Knowles, who was considered an attractive Democratic candidate. He certainly helped Thune in South Dakota, another state he won overwhelmingly. I've got to think he helped an awful lot in South Carolina, where there's another attractive Democrat. I mean, if you think if it's the party ID and the president's pull in those states that pull those Republican senators in, he will have personal clout in the Senate of a kind that's very unusual for any president in this day and age.
And of course, I guess in 02, the desk, it's getting late, folks. That noise you heard was the beginning of our anchor desk. It's begun to come apart here. Yeah, I guess he had some of that after 02 when he went out and campaigned and made himself an issue in the race, which is a risky thing to do. There's not a lot of history of presidential coats-tails in off-year elections, but he had some.
Yeah,
it was historic.
Jim Talent, and Norm Coleman. But you know what was true, and something that you said earlier in the evening, Bill, is that the president was outrunning many of these Senate candidates, the Republican Senate candidates. He was doing better than they were, which is one of the confusions that existed in these exit polls. But if that's the case, then you can say that he had coattails.
Look, if this holds and the president wins a substantial popular vote victory, I mean, if it's 2%, 3%, something like that, and these are not narrow margins in these various states. It seems to me that he can claim a mandate that he couldn't claim in 2000. Now I don't know whether the Democrats will recognize it. This has been such a bitter campaign.
Boy, I don't see anything close to a mandate.
Well, it's not 55-45, of course not.
What?
It's not a landslide, but compared to the charges of illegitimacy that surrounded the 2000 election, it's completely different.
We got a race to call here. This is not a surprise, but it is a big state. Michigan goes to John Kerry, and we see him now ahead by 97,000 votes with 78% in. That's a smaller margin than Bush is leading by in Ohio, and but it is enough for us to project John Kerry the winner in Michigan, thereby boosting his electoral total up to 238 and bringing him so close to what could have been a jumping off point with a little help from Ohio to the presidency. Speaking of Senator Kerry, Carl Cameron has been covering him. Carl Cameron, our chief political correspondent, has some information from his perch in Boston. Carl.
Hi, Brit. Well, we're expecting Senator Edwards, John Edwards of North Carolina, the vice presidential running mate, to actually mount the stage here in a matter of moments. The crowd cheering, the Secret Service and the traveling press, all here now. As we await Senator Edwards, we are told by top Kerry aides that the message will be, thanks for coming and enduring this rainy evening here in Boston. Keep the faith. We're going to keep counting the votes in Ohio, and we don't think it's over. The Kerry campaign saying that the statement issued a short time ago that we read from campaign manager Mary Beth Cahill was was meant to essentially say they are not going to go quietly, that if there is any vote that they believe is not being counted, any voter who they believe has been disenfranchised, they will seek to make sure that that's rectified in their view. So Senator Edwards tonight will come and tell the crowd to keep the faith, and will apparently be taking this up again in the days ahead. Brett?
We'll watch for Senator Edwards and see what he has to say. And in the meantime, we wait. We've been poised. This has gotten kind of absurd. We've been poised on the edge here of decision and finality on this presidential race, at least in terms, the best terms we can project it now, for what, more than an hour, I suppose. Yeah. President Bush is sitting there at 269. Isn't this typical of contemporary American presidential politics, that in this closely divided country, we got the president hung up there at 269 and machines shutting down in Iowa and things coming in slow from New Mexico and Nevada yet undecided, with the president actually was trailing in the last round of raw vote we saw out there. It's been a while, so.
Britt, 4 years ago, we were here till 6 o'clock in the morning. We got, I guess, 3.5 hours to go.
Let's not do that.
Unofficial what? Oh, the Kerry camp in Boston has just given us, excuse me for interrupting you, a 2-minute warning, unofficial 2-minute warning on John Edwards making a statement of some kind to the assembled hordes up in Copley Square in Boston, where the Kerry victory celebration had been mounted and planned, and I guess people are still in place out there in a chilly drizzle. Tough night up there, I suspect, for those folks.
I think it'll be interesting to see whether Senator Edwards has every right, I think, to say, let's make sure every vote is counted, and maybe let's even wait to see about the provisional votes. I think that'll be very different from saying we're mounting legal challenges, we don't accept the legitimacy of what has happened so far. I mean, the tone of this, I think, will be very revealing about what direction the Kerry camp intends to go.
Yeah, a decision not to concede is reasonable. A fight to the finish call is a different matter, no doubt. That is the stage, as you can see there, in Boston, upon which we expect to see Senator Edwards within a matter of a minute and a half or so. Let's just go back over what we're waiting for here. We're waiting for one state or other. Now, the president is leading, in Iowa, leading in New Mexico, expected by his handlers to rally from behind.
Ladies and gentlemen,
in Nevada.
The next Vice President of the United States.
And here's the introduction of John Edwards.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It's been a long night, but we've waited 4 years for this victory. We can wait one more night. Tonight, John and I are so proud of all of you who are here with us and all of you across the country who have stood with us in this campaign. John Kerry and I made a promise to the American people that in this election, every vote would count and every vote would be counted. Tonight, we are keeping our word, and we will fight for every vote. You deserve no less. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, a brief statement, certainly not leading us to be able to say with any confidence where this takes us. It was something less than a declaration of war on the results, though. I think that's a fair statement, and I think he seemed, if I may judge the expression on his face, as against the gestures he seemed rather determinedly to be making there, the thumbs up and all that, which is what you do. You got, you know, any politician has to come out to a group of people who've been sitting out there for 7 hours in the rain with some feeling for them, and you don't want to throw cold water on them, and they're entitled to a little pep, and he gave them a little, but not a lot, I wouldn't say.
I mean,
let's check in for a second with Carl Cameron Mort. Just hold that thought. Carl, what's your sense of that statement?
Well, Brit, a number of things. First of all, the crowd is already silenced and dispersing quite quickly. A few thousand people here, and it was clear that Senator Edwards is trying to make. They're going another day on this. John Edwards took the role that was former Commerce Secretary Bill Daley's for Al Gore 4 years ago in Nashville, when Al Gore was on his way up to actually concede and was stopped by a man who's now working for John Kerry named David Morehouse and said, "Don't go." And shortly thereafter, Bill Daley went up and said, "We're going to count every vote, and it's going to be a while." The Kerry Edwards campaign has suggested that the combination of what Mr. Edwards just said and the Mary Beth Cahill statement was meant to be tough. They are not backing away from the challenge in Ohio, which is not to say that they're going to wage some sort of a litigation carpet bombing of the country, but they are definitely going to make sure that everything is exhausted in Ohio, no matter how long that takes.
Well, of course, you get in now to the question of what the procedures permit. If the margin comes out, and of course it was up to something 126,000 or 128,000, something like that, when last we looked, with only a few precincts remaining, that would put it outside the margin of an automatic recount. So I suppose you can demand a recount of some kind. Let's look at it now. 125,000 votes plus a couple hundred for President Bush, with 97% of the precincts in. That's a reasonably substantial margin, 2% margin there. I suppose you'd have to find an awful lot of alleged irregularities and undercounted votes and provisional ballots and absentee votes that broke for you, and an awful lot of stuff to make the case plausibly that you really did win the election. I mean, what the recount process is designed to do is to make sure that the person who appears to have won the election really did. And you have to have something to go on, Carl. It's a 0.25% margin or less of the total vote. That was met easily in a bunch of states 4 years ago, but it isn't here.
Well, and it will be 11 days before, according to Ohio Secretary of State Ken Blackwell, they'll actually take a look at the 200 to 250,000 some odd provisional ballots and the overseas ballots. So that's a bit of a lag time in all of this. And again, mathematically, Senator Kerry would have to win an overwhelming majority of all of them, presumably, to make up the gap. Nonetheless, they, as we've said all night long, I mean, the other thing is, Brit, there is a tremendous army of Kerry Edwards supporters in Ohio. 3,200 lawyers just from Ohio alone in Ohio, never mind those that are presumably looking for early morning flights from around the country to go there.
What are they going to do? I mean, you can only file so many lawsuits. I mean, you kind of begin to wonder here, Carl, what exactly they could all do. I mean, I suppose you could solicit testimony from people in precincts who will say that they tried to vote and got hustled off to Buffalo or somewhere. But you know, yeah, it's a big margin to upset.
clearly, and they seem to be recognizing that. We're still told there's a possibility that even Senator Kerry could surface before the evening is out, though, judging from the way this crowd is dispersing and the way the Kerry campaign seems to be sort of shutting down for the evening, it looks as though they're going to fight again tomorrow, Brit.
All right, Carl. Appreciate it very much. Keep us posted if there's anything more to tell us. In the meantime, you of all people deserve rest after your long journey with the Kerry campaign from the start. Michael Barone is standing by with some further thoughts. Michael, what can you tell us about these remaining states?
Well, Iowa, Britt, we're seeing George W. Bush hold on to a 11,000 vote lead. There's not much in the way of other precincts. There's 66 precincts left out. They don't seem to be any in heavily Democratic areas now. That Wapello County, which is the city of Ottumwa, the small factory town in southeastern Iowa, have come in. So that margin possibly affectable by absentee votes. Not clear whether all those are counted, but Iowa, the president seems to have a lead in that state with 7 electoral votes. Then we got New Mexico. New Mexico is, President Bush has a lead of nearly 30,000, 29,000 votes, but there's a couple of curious things about New Mexico, and the decision desk people pointed out to me here at Fox that New Mexico is currently showing on the board fewer votes cast than were cast in 2000. This is true of none of the other target states. We've seen turnout go up in Republican areas in target states. We've seen turnout go up in Democratic areas in target states. And there's no reason to believe that New Mexico is an exemption from the rule. There is some unclarity about whether whether or how many of all the votes cast have been reported, and the absentee votes in many cases have not been reported. So while this looks like a big margin for Mr. Bush, there were some real oddities about the counting of the vote 4 years ago, and so there is hesitation to call this state for the president, even though he's got a lead of 30,000 votes as compared to Al Gore's lead of 366 votes 4 years before.
So it doesn't look like we're going to get either of these for a while, or what?
I think that it does not look like we're going to get either of those for a while. There's probably a better bet for Iowa, which has got more regular vote methods than New Mexico does, if I could use that word. In Wisconsin, we've got a 15,000 vote edge for John Kerry, with a variety of rural counties to come in. Most of Milwaukee, city of Milwaukee and Milwaukee County has already come in, and similarly most of Dane County, Madison, which is a big margin for the Democrats. Not clear to me whether or not George W. Bush gets enough votes in these rural areas to erase a 15,000 vote Kerry margin. It's possible, but by no means assured, and there are some Democratic rural counties that are still out there.
Okay, Michael, thanks very much. Done a wonderful job for us analyzing that stuff and giving viewers, I think, a real sense of what decision desks go through, and so we're poised here, waiting for the final moment to go. We'll take a break, though, while we're waiting. Stay tuned.
Big hand to the people.
That is the scene at the Beverly Hilton Hotel in Los Angeles, where Arnold Schwarzenegger is addressing supporters of the Republican Party. He has just said that the winners in the state of California are the people of the state.
Twins, but I did not know. But anyway, let me just say, last year you elected me and you sent me to Sacramento to create some action. And this is exactly what I've done. We've turned around the state, we created some action, and we tried to make it again the golden state that it once was. Well, tonight, you gave me the tools that I needed to get the job done. And I wanted to thank the people for working so hard. There were thousands and thousands of volunteers that I saw when I traveled up and down the state of California, campaigning for my initiatives and campaigning for the different candidates. I tell you that the kind of work that I've seen was so inspirational, it was uplifting, and I want to thank all those volunteers for putting up the yard signs, for going out handing out leaflets, doing fundraisers, knocking on doors, making phone calls, and campaigning and campaigning and campaigning. So because of all this hard work, I think the people spoke loud and clear. This was a victory that was not a victory for me, but it was a victory from the people of California. So a big hand to the people of California that have spoken out.
Okay, well, it's always interesting to see Arnold Schwarzenegger in action. He's become one of the political phenomena of our time, one of the most popular politicians in the country in terms of his standing with the people of the state, but he wasn't on the ballot. You might not have been able to tell that, but he wasn't on the ballot tonight. He campaigned for some of the ballot initiatives out there, and he also campaigned very hard for the president. I thought when he said earlier that the winner tonight, that we have a winner tonight, I thought he was going to say the president, but he didn't, and no one else has formally said that on the president's behalf either. But as you can see, folks, 269 electoral votes, that's on the edge of outright victory, and it is certainly the stuff, if it never moved beyond there, of victory by the vote of the House of Representatives. So the president, it can safely be said tonight, is the likely winner, if not the clear winner. And there's some question about whether we will get the results from any of these remaining states where we're being very cautious about making calls.
Well, it's just at 269. I mean, just to recap what you just said, there's no way he can lose. I mean, he at 269, 30 states in the House of Representatives are controlled by Republican majorities, and therefore they would vote to give President Bush a second term. So there's just no question about that. I mean, the reservation at this point is whether or not these additional states come in. And the other part, we've been talking about whether or not Senator Kerry, and we just saw Senator Edwards say that he's going to fight on, whether or not Senator Kerry in consultation with Senator Kennedy and others might come forward and concede. The other half of this is that we haven't seen President Bush come forward and say, you know what, I've won. And so he is playing it, and I think playing it with some reserve and playing it like a statesman and saying, you know what, I can wait this out. He's not impatient about this, and I suspect that he's thought through this scenario. Maybe even Senator Kerry had to give some thought to it, although no one wants to say, you know, that they gave some forethought to the possibility of losing or whatever. But I think the fact that the president hasn't come forward is a sign of grace on his part.
Senator Edwards is striking, if we think back to Bill Daley's coming out. I don't remember exactly what he said 4 years ago, but certainly the
race goes on. The campaign goes on.
Senator Edwards did not say that. He said we can wait one more night. I think they're waiting for all the votes to come in. They want to see what the margin is in Ohio. They obviously want to wait to see if New Mexico or Iowa or Nevada comes through for the president to give him an absolute majority, since obviously they wouldn't concede if it were going to go to the House. They would wait for the House constitutionally to do its duty, I think. But I was struck by the difference in tone between what Senator Edwards said and what Bill Daley said. And there was, so far as I can tell, there hasn't been the kind of massive assault on the legitimacy of the process that there was in Florida. The butterfly ballot, the alleged racial discrimination.
That didn't happen until after, though.
Oh, no.
It began
while the count was still going on.
It went
Butterfly ballot. No, they were challenging that.
And it began late that night. So I will see, but I think they're keeping their options open, as they should, the Kerry Edwards team. But I think they are laying the groundwork perhaps for a concession tomorrow if New Mexico comes in and if the Ohio or Iowa comes in, and if the Ohio margin stays at 125,000 votes or so.
Well, I think they're preserving their options. I mean, this was a holding action on the part of John Edwards, and you know, both campaigns were predicting going into the the election that it would be over on election night. We would have a winner, a clear winner. We think we may have a clear winner, but nobody's declaring it. So we're going to go at least into tomorrow. So that prediction.
We may have a winner, but I don't know that it's clear. I think it was a prayer.
I
think it was a prayer on the part of everybody involved that there would be a clear winner.
Right. Okay. But it didn't happen.
In practical terms, it seems to be. But it's
okay. But the question is, does the Kerry campaign accept the Ohio verdict, or do they figure out some way that they can possibly challenge the Ohio result and maybe drag it out for 11 more days until these provisional ballots and the absentee ballots and the overseas ballots and all that get counted, in the hopes that something will turn it around? I mean, this thing might not end for another week and a half.
Well, we'll have a declared winner, though, if New Mexico or Iowa or any of these states, that are out will come. Well, I know, but Ohio has already been declared by Fox, by others, and and the media will have declared a winner, and the Kerry people may examine the numbers and see whether it's going to be overturned or not. The ball is in their court. I mean, President Bush, I don't believe, is going to come out and claim victory until Senator Kerry, at least in the short run here, until Senator Kerry first concedes, and I suspect that may happen tomorrow. And if it doesn't, well then,
he's still president. He's still president and likely to remain so.
Yeah.
All right. Let's take a break. Come back for some final thoughts and observations, and perhaps a few calls. Stay tuned. We can call now for president. There's no check mark up there, but we're calling. Fox News is projecting, there it goes, the Hawaii presidential race for Senator Kerry. Plenty of precincts still out, but the margin is such that we believe he'll be the winner there, as was widely expected, although, of course, there was the Dick Cheney visit out there in the final days when the race had appeared closer than anybody thought. That gave them some hope, but not to be realized. Senator Kerry picks up another few electoral votes. He now stands at 242 against 269 for the president. We're going to turn this over to some of my other colleagues here shortly, but before we do, I want to get some final thoughts from the people here on the panel, beginning with you, Juan Williams.
Well, I think that things are unsettled, and so I think the sense of illegitimacy, that question for many Democrats remains, and I think that's why they're going to be so upset about what the exit poll showed initially versus what the outcome was for the raw vote. I'm very curious as to what extent Senator Kerry will go to try to make it clear to Democrats that he was fighting for every vote, that every vote counted. We did not have any episodes that would indicate there was voter suppression or people being illegally barred from the voting place today. That would suggest that the popular vote, which favors President Bush, is legitimate. But I think there are many people who are going to have all sorts of theories, all sorts of questions about the way things proceeded today. It was a very unusual day in American political history.
I think it was a close election, but a clear victory. It will be a clear victory, I believe, for President Bush. The first time in 40 years an incumbent president, furthermore, will have won re-election, and his party will have increased its seats in both the Senate and the House. And this is a very big deal. Presidents have won re-election without coattails. Nixon in 72, Reagan in 84, Clinton in 96. Presidents have lost, run for re-election and lost. Carter in 80, Carter in 80, first President Bush in 1992. For President Bush, who won with a minority of the popular vote, launched a difficult war in Iraq, had a tough economic situation that he inherited and could be accused of no job growth and all that, for him to win re-election and for the Republican Party to increase its seats in both the Senate and the House, it's a big moment, I think, in American politics.
Yeah, it's not a gigantic mandate, but it's such a turnaround from 4 years ago when the president lost the popular vote that I think that he's in a formidable position, and it's going to be shocking and surprising to all those foreigners who thought that who were rooting for John Kerry's victory, to have the popular vote in this country go for this president and sustain him and basically reward him for a foreign policy that they hated. But the American people have endorsed him, it appears, certainly in the popular vote, and I don't see what there is to have him change course in any way.
Yeah, I don't either. One of the things that's striking to me is that President Bush is the first president since 1988 to win a majority of the vote. Bill Clinton never got over 50%, and of course George Bush didn't get over 50% in 2000. His father was the last one. Now, the other thing that is, and I throw out the word realignment. Republicans won a realigning election in 1994. They took the House and the Senate. They are almost exactly where they were back then. They have held for 10 years now this majority in the Senate, except for the year or so when Jim Jeffords switched parties, and they've added seats. They were the minority for 40 or 50 years or more, going back to prior to the New Deal. They were the minority party in America. They've made themselves the parity party, plus maybe a slight edge over the Democrats, and they dominate Washington and will continue to dominate Washington in the same way they have for the last 10 years, which is remarkable.
All right, we're going to take a brief break here now. When we come back, we have a few other people we want to check in with. Please stay tuned. on a night when the president is poised for a clear electoral college victory and at a minimum for victory in the House of Representatives, if that's all, as that's what it comes to. Stay tuned. That's the latest we have from New Mexico, a state we're not prepared to call because there's some uncertainties about where some of the vote is, that's out might come from. Total vote out there has been less than imagined, so we're a little concerned about that. But the president has a 5-point lead with 96% in. Looks like he will eventually win that state, but we're being careful about it. That would put him, of course, over 270 and make him the clear winner. Nevada, the president is now inched ahead of Senator Kerry by 16,000 votes after trailing. This is what the Republicans predicted. We're still not prepared to call that race either. That, of course, like any other state, would put the president over. And finally, Iowa, we're watching that. The president holding on to a 12,000 vote lead, all but 2% of the precincts in. Statistically, I suppose something is possible could happen for Senator Kerry there. We don't expect it, but we're being careful. And in Wisconsin, Senator Kerry ahead by 19,000 votes, 9% of the precincts yet to report. That's statistically possible for the president to turn that around. Not expected, but that would bring Senator Kerry ever closer. As you can see, 269 to 242, a margin that would allow the president to win the election in the House of Representatives. Obviously, he'd rather win it outright with the people. And the popular vote, as we have followed it throughout the last several hours, showed the president on the verge of winning about 51%, if that holds, of the popular vote, making him the popular vote winner, which he was not 4 years ago. Before we go here, I want to check in with two of our stalwarts who have been with us most of the night, and all of the night, in fact. First to Chris Wallace, the host of Fox News Sunday, who helped us with exit polls and with interviews. Chris, some final thoughts from you.
Well, Britt, I'm going to assume, for the sake of argument, and I think it's certainly going to happen, that George W. Bush is going to be reelected president, whether it's later today, Wednesday, the day after the election, or tomorrow, or next week. And it seems to me there are two interesting points that come from that. First is, what is George W. Bush going to do? We remember, of course, in 2000 where he did not win the popular vote, and it took him 36, I think it was, days to win the electoral vote. And a lot of people said at that time, you know, you don't have a mandate and you're not going to be able to govern as if you did have a mandate. Well, George Bush said, no, I'm the president, and I am going to vote as if I govern as if I had a mandate. And so you saw him with a very aggressive policy to cut taxes, a very aggressive policy on reforming education, and after 9/11, a very aggressive foreign policy. What's going to be so interesting is he's going to have much more of a mandate, maybe not a landslide, but he is clearly, it seems, going to have a popular vote majority. In addition, eventually, he's going to have a clearer victory than he had last time in the electoral vote. But he didn't talk much about what he's going to do over the next 4 years. I think clearly that the tax cuts are going to stay and perhaps become permanent. He's talked about, obviously, finishing the job in Iraq, but one wonders what he really believes after having seen how much more difficult that enterprise has become than he thought it was going to be. He's talked about Social Security, private accounts, health savings accounts, a variety of small measures. It'll be interesting to see whether he can get those through Congress, but I think it's going to be fascinating to see how, with relatively speaking, a much bigger mandate than he had in 2000, how George W. Bush is going to govern. The other question I have is on the other side about the Democrats, because it seems to me if John Kerry goes ahead and loses this race, the Democratic Party is kind of in a shambles. You've got the possibility that Tom Daschle, the Senate Minority Leader, is going to lose, the first Senate leader of either party to lose since 1952. John Kerry, they will have lost the presidency, lost seats in the House, lost seats in the Senate. I can't imagine that there's going to be a tremendous interest or demand for John Edwards. He's lost his Senate seat. He gave it up voluntarily, and so you wonder what his forum is going to be for the next 4 years. Seems to me that Hillary Rodham Clinton now becomes the leader of a kind of tattered Democratic Party. Britt?
Interesting insights. Let's turn to Michael Barone, who has been with us all night, sifting the material and explaining to us the decisions that have been made and why some couldn't be made. Michael, some final thoughts from you, please.
Well, I think there's really no doubt that George W. Bush has been reelected President of the United States. We're going to have to wait to see some of the final figures before we do, but in 3 of the 4 states that are remaining outward, it's still uncalled by Fox News. Bush has a popular vote lead in the tabulated vote, and there is quite a lot of good reason to think that those are going to be prevail when the final votes are counted. So we're looking at a second Bush presidency. The popular vote, as it's reported right now, is 51% for Bush, 48% for John Kerry. That's very similar to the 51 to 47% margin by which William McKinley beat William Jennings Bryan in 1896. That was an election that Karl Rove, the president's chief political advisor, says is a model for one building a political party and building a policy movement that succeeds in becoming a majority party. George W. Bush's Republican Party isn't there yet. If he has a majority, and that 51-48 number could change slightly, it's not a big majority. The Democrats are still angry. The question is whether they will self-destruct over implausible challenges to an election that seems fairly decided.
Michael, thanks very much. Thanks so much for your insights and your help tonight in explaining to us why this race was unfolding as it did. For my part, just a couple of thoughts here tonight. Having followed this race through the year, the one thing I watched carefully were the two scenarios that each of the two campaigns had. The Democrat scenario was that the public basically had made a decision that it wanted a new president and that their man John Kerry needed simply to be a plausible alternative to George W. Bush. Their convention was planned that way, their campaign was designed that way, and in the closing days it really even began to seem that that vision of the race might in the end, after it hadn't seemed so promising for so long, might come true. The Bush camp, on the other hand, believed, even in the days when the president's approval rating was in the heady 70s and sometimes higher, that the re-election race was going to come down and look very much as it had in the year 2000, that we were living in a 50-50 nation, that no one was going to get any big resounding victories this year, and that they had to dig it out on the ground and in the trenches and try to build on the margin that they had 4 years ago to squeak their man by, and that is tonight what appears to have happened. By a small margin, but a more meaningful margin by far than it was a few years ago. It appears that the Bush camp's political vision of this race has turned out to be more nearly correct. That concludes our portion of the coverage tonight. We thank you very much for watching us. We're nowhere near finished covering this race tonight. I'm about, as I depart here, Uma Pemaraju and Bob Sellers will be in to carry the ball from now on. So I say to you, thanks for watching. Good night. Stay tuned.